everybody, to the 13th Annual AltCar Expo and Conference. Today, we're going to focus on Industry and Fleet Conference, and this is going to be a lot on California's commitment to alternative technology, transportation, infrastructure, and energy. So, anyways, we've got a good group of speakers today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our first one, but we encourage you to stay here and also check out the ride and drive. And we'll start here with talking about we're fortunate to have Terry Tamminen as our first keynote speaker. And he, as a lot of you know, he definitely has been around in California and state government and has been doing a lot of research studies under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was Secretary of California EPA, and he had a lot to do with the implementation of the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006, Hydrogen Highway Network, and Million Solar Roofs Initiative. In 2010, he co-founded the R20 Regions of Climate Action, a public-private partnership bringing together governments, business, financial markets, NGOs, and academia to really work on measurable, large-scale, low-carbon, climate-resilient economic development projects that solve the climate crisis and build our global economy. And more recently, definitely you may have seen that he has joined the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation as CEO. He's also author of books, including Cracking the Carbon Code, and he has a lot to say on all of this. And if you've ever heard him speak before, you know it's fun, and you get to hear about his own experience with the vehicles and energy and what's coming next in the state. So please welcome Terry.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Is this one working? Can we get this handheld to work? Let's see. There we go. Yeah, terrific. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for kicking off. Is this the 13th AltCar? I can't believe it. It's been that many years, and we've seen this grow from what was just kind of a funky place where people with converted electric vehicles, and I remember even one guy in the very first year had like a skateboard and a sail and a big fan on his back. I'm not kidding. And was trying to sell that as electric vehicles. And it worked. I don't know how many times he fell off of it, but think about the progress. And I remember at that first one speaking to you and the group and saying, how many more years do you think it'll be before these vehicles are not the alternative, that in fact the petroleum-powered vehicles will be? They'll just be in museums, and occasionally we'll trot them out to say, hey, remember what our parents used to drive? Well, we're getting closer and closer, as this year's AltCar Expo will definitely prove. You know, I want to start by telling you something that might sound funny, but it actually exemplifies the challenge that all of us have today and into the future as we make that shift from these vehicles being alt to being mainstream. Donald Trump, you've heard of him, he was at a school, a grade school, quite a few months ago, earlier this year, might have been late last year, and he was bragging about the American space program to kids, and this is true. And he said, you know, we have a great space program. We're going to build a colony on Mars, and we're even going to land on the sun. And that was the reaction by the kids. And one of the kids said, Mr. President, you can't land on the sun, you would die. And he said, no, you won't. We'll land there at night. Now, this is true. You can look it up. I tell you this funny story because while it is humorous, it does exemplify the real challenge that all of us face today. It's that too many people in this country and around the world don't understand the world we live in. And some, as we know, with the climate denial industry and the fossil fuel industry that obviously spends a lot of money to keep their business as usual going, we can understand why people are misinformed or ill-informed. But that is the fact. So this past week, when we saw the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change come out with its warning after decades of reports, one after another, that showed increasingly what the problems were going to be from climate change and what was causing it and why we need to move away from a fossil-fueled transportation system, not to mention electric power grid that's fossil-fueled and so forth. Despite warning after warning, now we see the dire consequences happening in real time. The more extreme, devastating, and frequent storms like Hurricane Michael that's going on in real time on our TV screens, and of course for the victims, poor victims in Florida and in those regions today. I mean, everything going back years ago to Hurricane Sandy, which was unprecedented. The list goes on and on. You know that, whether it's forest fires, whether it's droughts, and so on and so forth. And yet, many people either choose to ignore it or are willfully ignorant. So what do we do to wake them up? And by the way, on that story about climate change and about why what you're doing here is so incredibly important, I urge you to go back and watch 2 films. You remember Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, which now is about 15 years old. He came up there with his PowerPoint with slides and charts and scientists and said, here's what's going to happen. 10 years later, in 2016, a guy named Leonardo DiCaprio made a movie called Before the Flood. And he went out and actually went to places all over the world, Pacific Islands and India and in the United States and in Canada, all around the world, to show that everything Al Gore had warned us about 10 years earlier was happening, but faster and worse. So we can't claim that we don't know what's going on, and we can't claim that we're not already suffering the consequences of a warming planet. But there's good news too, and I'm actually an optimist, and I'm hopeful for 3 primary reasons. First of all, although the Paris Agreement on climate change, which, as you all know, was reached about 3 years ago, coming up on its 3rd anniversary right now, many people criticized that because it was voluntary and because it didn't go far enough. Most people agree that if the countries do everything they said they would do in that agreement, it will only slow warming to about half of the amount that we need to slow warming to. And then, of course, it's voluntary. So I actually think those are 2 of the greatest strengths of that agreement, because it's voluntary. The fact that the country said, you know what, we can do all this, and almost everyone agrees that countries could do more. But if this is what they say they can do and are willing to do and have programmed in their policies and incentive programs and so on, great. Let's take that off the table. I mean, how many of you, if you were going out to buy a new house this weekend, if you had a 50% down payment, you would say, okay, I can do this, I'll find the other 50%. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it did only go halfway, but we now know how quickly the technology is changing and how fast we can actually accelerate that down payment into a full success over time. Admittedly, we're running out of time, as that IPCC warning tells us. But despite the fact that the governments maybe only got us halfway there with the Paris Agreement, and now you have people like Donald Trump backtracking, and other countries. We're seeing in the politics of Brazil, which is, I think, now the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And of course, we worry about the Amazon rainforest and so forth disappearing, which can be a great carbon sink and a solution. The politicians down there that are running for president talking about following Trump out of the Paris Agreement. So, you know, there's definitely signs to be concerned, but it's not up to them. It's up to us. And look at all of the commitments being made by cities, by states, by provinces, by some countries. I mean, California, as I think most of you know, they just passed a law to get to 100% renewable energy by 2045. Yeah, 100%. And when we came into office in Governor Schwarzenegger's administration in 2003, just 15 years ago, we wrote an executive order and got a law passed to accelerate it to 20% by 2015. And look at how far we've come in actual implementation of renewable energy on our grid and the ability to forecast when we could get to 100%, the 7th largest economy on the planet. And it isn't just California. Look at all the cities and even countries that are now setting deadlines to ban the internal combustion engine from their cities or their countries, to end the use of that. When we came into government in 2003, you couldn't imagine that outcome. And when the first AltCar Expo was held, you couldn't imagine that outcome. So now we actually can predict when the alt cars will no longer be alt, right? So that's very exciting. So the first reason, like I said, is I think we can be very hopeful because of what governments actually are doing. even though there's the noise of the few that are sticking their head in the sand. The second thing is the technology, and that's what's making it possible for governments to be more ambitious in their goals. Think about the fact that, again, when Schwarzenegger came into office, solar was about $4 a watt, and that's not the installed cost, that was just the technology. Today it's under $1 a watt, and it makes it possible to get to the point where it's even going to be less than $1 a watt installed. And that makes it cheaper than any other kind of energy. And as we see, ironically, climate change might actually force that to speed up, because we see people who don't have access to the grid. How long do you think the people of Panama City in Florida are going to be without power? And the people that have solar on their rooftops will get back into action much quicker. And regional grids and distributed energy, the cost of all of that, the distribution of it is coming way down. So I'm very hopeful about the technology, and partnering, of course, with that are vehicles. Look at the vehicles. I drove the first Honda FCX, a demonstration vehicle, which I think was the first mainstream vehicle at the first AltCar Expo. It was still a demonstration. Average people couldn't get it. Today I drive the Honda Clarity. My wife drives the Hyundai Tucson in the fuel cell model, and we've both driven the Mirai and the Mercedes-Benz and all the other ones that the mainstream car companies are bringing along. Of course, God bless Elon Musk and making battery cars very hip and cool like an iPhone. But now look at all of the mainstream car companies that are coming in, following him, because they see that marketplace is there. So we know the technology is getting cheaper, better, faster, and more ubiquitous. And once that starts, that is a flood that you cannot stop. And the third reason I'm optimistic is you. Because more and more people come to these kinds of expos now every single year. More and more people are covering it. In fact, I think today might be the first time that we actually have national and international news crews here to cover this AltCar Expo and to realize how these cars aren't alt anymore. I'm also encouraged by the people that I meet every single day from other world leaders. Gregor Robertson, the mayor of Vancouver, who's doing so much in that town to make his city a leader in alternative energy and alternative vehicles and the greenest city in the world. Mayor Hidalgo of Paris, who's leading the C40 and leading both governments and nonprofits and trying to keep the Paris Agreement alive and get that extra level of ambition. But ordinary people who are picking up the technology, who are putting solar on their rooftops, who are measuring their carbon footprint, kids. There's a group here in Los Angeles called Grades of Green, which started out also about 13 years ago in one school. And the kids did Meatless Monday and Trash-Free Tuesday and Walk to School Wednesday and things like that, little projects in their tiny school. I just got an update the other day from the kids that organized this. It's now in 700 schools in 30 countries around the world, with 40 of those kinds of projects, not just 3 or 4. Yeah, Grades of Green, look them up. That generation will help us overcome the head in the sand, the people who think you can land on the sun, the people who think that we can ignore climate change. That's why I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because of them and because all of you are here. Many, year after year after year, and all of a sudden when it's an overnight success and the whole world is driving an electric vehicle and powering them with power from the sun and the wind, and they say, oh yeah, that just happened in the last few years, didn't it? Well, we'll all just smile and say, okay, yeah, it was a little more than that. But we'll be very glad that everybody else finally caught on. You know, Shakespeare says, nature's bequest gives nothing, but doth lend. And so when nature calls thee to be gone, what acceptable legacy canst thou leave? Well, the work that you are doing will leave a legacy of which even William Shakespeare would be writing poetry for years to come. Thank you.
Have an annual AltCar award that Terry O'Day will present and talk a little bit about that. This person who received the award will also be in a conversation with Terry about some of these topics. Terry, a lot of you know for his role in City Council, but he is now responsible for Energy, E-Mobility, U.S. Strategy and Market Development. That's a wholly owned subsidiary of Energy SE, Germany's second largest utility company, providing only renewable energy to the European market and a leading technology provider for EV charging. And prior to that, he led product strategy and market development for EVgo, the nation's largest public fast-charging company for EVs. And his was focused then on construction and development in the Western U.S., regulatory and legislative initiatives, marketing, communications, technology, demonstration programs. Currently, he is council member for City of Santa Monica and was first elected in November 2010, served 2 years as mayor pro tem. As you know, the city is doing quite a lot in buses, fleet, and renewable energy. Definitely he's been part of that, and we'd like to have him come on up now. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Really no better way to get us started today than to hear from Terry Tamminen. Terry's a phenomenal leader and member of our community. I have had the honor and challenge of following Terry in other roles in the past as well, and so I know how hard this can be. But I'm pleased to hand off that opportunity by introducing our awardee. This year's AltCar Award is given to Phillip Kobernick from Alameda County. And as Terry Tamminen put it, governments have the opportunity to set ambitious goals, but how to make it possible is the real challenge. The optimism that Terry discussed in his talk today comes from the solutions that folks like Phillip Kobernick are putting on the ground. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that at some length. I want to begin, though, by inviting Phillip up to the stage and handing off this award.
Thank you.
All right. Congratulations. You want to say something? Or you want to sit down and talk?
Yeah, I'll just say a quick thing. Well, obviously, thank you so much to AltCar Expo. It's such an honor to be receiving something like this. I want to say that I'm very fortunate to have a lot of support in my agency from our board of directors, our internal director, and I have a wonderful team that, on top of their regular jobs and making sure that our vehicles are working and back on the field, put up with me when we try to test out new technology that doesn't always work, but a lot of times it does. So I just have a fantastic team, and so it's really on behalf of all them. But thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations.
Sure.
Well, thank you. It's an honor. You know, in my role at City Council, I know how challenging it can be to turn the battleship at times, and managing a fleet as diverse as yours is a tremendous challenge. And it sounds like the program's expanded over the years. The kind of work that you're doing has advanced. Maybe you could just get us started by kind of setting the stage. Tell us about the fleet you manage and the types of operations you're involved in.
Yeah, happy to. So I manage Alameda County's fleet. If folks are unfamiliar, we're on the sunny side of the San Francisco Bay. It's from Oakland, Hayward, Fremont, Berkeley, and then it kind of does this hockey stick curve out to Dublin. But we're a huge organization. We have 10,000 county employees. And to support our highly mobile employee workforce, we have about 1,300 on-road vehicle assets. And these range from everything from restaurant inspectors to social services workers who are transporting, kids that are at risk, all the way to law enforcement, which is about a third of my fleet is in some kind of law enforcement, although we do have lights and sirens on hybrid vehicles. So we started really investing in green technology for our vehicles about 6 or 7 years ago when our board of supervisors passed our climate action plan. And so since then, we've taken advantage of the slew of state and local rebates and grants that are available. It's great to be in California. There's just so many resources that have been instrumental. So in the past 6 years, when we started really investing in fleet electrification, we've now installed about 130 charging stations. We're at about 80 all-electric, although we'll be past 100 before the end of the calendar year. And about a third of our fleet is on some kind of advanced fuel, either hybrid, EV, or a small group of renewable diesel or vehicles that run on renewable diesel. So we've had a lot of tremendous top-down support in Alameda County, but that's kind of the range of things that we do. It's pretty wide, but I think the thing that has benefited us too is that my vehicle fleet is about 90% light duty. So that market has really come online in the last several years. You know, when I first started about 6 years ago, there was a couple of all-electric vehicles you could get for sedans, and now there's just so many, which has just been great. So that's been a real help for us.
So tell me, who are the users, the different user groups? How does this work? If I'm an employee for the county, what is my job? How am I accessing the vehicle? Do I choose my car? How does this work?
It's all, so yeah, we have so many different applications. So we started with motor pools. So we kind of run an internal car share. Any fleet folks in the audience? Show of hands. Folks in fleet? Yeah. For those who are raising their hands, do you have motor pools, shared pools? Yeah, okay, good. So we do that too. Motor pools represent about 10% of my fleet, about 150 vehicles or so, and that's where we started with all electric. You know, we kind of let people ease into it. We started doing this 5 years ago, so folks can they can try it out, but they also have other options. It was kind of a more smooth transition. All my motor pools are almost all electric now, or hybrid electric. There's very few remaining gas vehicles in my motor pools, and now it's on to harder things. Unique assignments, behavioral healthcare response teams and things that have more unique functions. That's what we're kind of pushing more into. So it's a mix. The county employees can absolutely go check out a car from our motor pool, or they just have an assigned vehicle, and that's where we're trying to toggle into right now. And for the folks that do make a choice, we're certainly seeing that folks are still very apprehensive. So we've been doing a lot of hands-on communication, outreach, and even behavior change research. Me and some of my staff went and did some community-based social marketing research to sort of see how we could sort of tailor messaging to get folks to be more comfortable and confident, sort of stealing a little bit from the marketing world to get folks to be more comfortable with EVs. So we've done a lot of that too, and that's been a big help in terms of utilization.
What did you learn when you did the research? What are the messages that resonate for the users?
Yeah, so social norming is a big, anybody in marketing? Social norming is a great strategy. So instead of me from the general services agency or the green guy coming in and saying, take out this leaf, or now bolts and a whole bunch of other ones, you want that message to be coming from someone that they know, that is like them, is in their agency, that they can see themselves in. So we have a lot of people conveying our message for us. We have the dedicated greenies in their agencies will help us. They'll attend ride and drive events with us. We may even invest in some print material, and we'll feature them. We're not going to feature us. We'll feature them, and they'll say, I drive an electric vehicle because I can use the HOV lane, and it gets me to my meetings faster. So sort of the strategies like that have been real helpful.
And have you seen results from those?
Oh, yeah. So I know we did a big education campaign last year, and we got a 10 to 15% increase in utilization for our EVs in one application where people had to make a choice between a gas car and an EV. There's a lot more work to be done in terms of that too. A lot more. And we do focus groups with our employees too, to kind of understand why they're not choosing EVs when they're in that.
Well, 10 to 15% is a great balance from a single first effort.
Yeah.
That's really terrific.
Yeah,
And
a lot more to do.
Now, you have about 300 plug-in or hybrid vehicles?
Yeah, so we have about more than that. We have about 300 hybrids. And then on top of that, we have about 80 all-electrics.
Out of how many in the total fleet?
1,300.
1,300.
Yeah, and so that ranges from light-duty sedans to cargos to police vehicles, full patrol cars, bomb squad vehicles, all the way to sort of larger trucks. The only thing I don't have is fire, essentially, which I'm very glad to not deal with.
And what's the vision? Do you have a vision to increase that by a certain percentage? How
Yeah.
do you plan that out?
We're trying to ideally triple our EV numbers in the next 3 to 4 years. We're going to be over 100 in the next 6 months or so. We're installing another about 100 stations in the next year, so that's going to be a huge help to getting to more locations. But ideally, we're going to be over 240, 250 in the next few years. That's the goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And these are at multiple sites, obviously. And so
14 sites right now.
you just hit on charging, and something I've spent a little bit of time on my career on.
Yeah.
So I know some of those challenges, but what are the challenges that you faced in particular as you rolled out charging solutions?
Yeah, so that's a process. You know, for me, it's always convincing folks that this is not an actual construction project, but that I lost that battle a long time ago. So we've had a lot of incentives, which has been a huge help for us in terms of installing the actual infrastructure. I mean, one of the hardest parts, and I'll talk about this more in the panel later because it's some pretty juicy stuff, I think, in my opinion. But you know, we have charging stations at about 14 locations right now, and that spans multiple rate tariffs. So for me, I pay one price for gas because we have our own gas fueling stations internally, and we adjust the price every day. But I know what it is. In Hayward and Oakland, it's my fuel. It's the same cost. That's not there for EVs yet. So that's been a real challenge in terms of determining how much money have we spent on energy as a fuel last year. It's a very hard challenge to solve. But so that's something that we're focusing on a lot now. But deploying has been real helpful with the incentives that we've had.
That's a great teaser for the next panel.
Yeah.
When you'll have utility partners, and I'll look forward to giving them the ground level view. In our experience at the City of Santa Monica, our council adopted a goal to be 100% electric and zero carbon by 2030.
Ooh.
And we have at Big Blue Bus, we have a couple hundred buses in the fleet. And our staff is now wrapping their minds around this challenge, and in particular have hit on the two pieces regarding charging, which is one, how do you get it installed on your property, and two, what's it going to cost? And so on the installation costs, the folks at Edison came back and said, you know, this is going to be about a $5 million substation for you. And our guys went, wow, didn't really expect it to be that much, but okay, now what?
Yeah.
And then the Edison guys, I think, said, wow, we didn't really expect that answer. Okay, 5 years for the construction project.
Wow.
So when you're thinking about fleet planning, you know, and you're thinking about charging infrastructure, these are the kinds of considerations that come into play.
Yeah.
How do you do that on the site level?
I know, right? That is very hard. So we don't have anything as big as buses like that. Very fortunate. Although we have installed some DC fast chargers, but that we have not had to deal with anything that big. I'll say this. I'll kind of answer the question slightly differently. One thing that I'm going to have to do is, because we're government and our facilities are old and everything we have is old, we have a lot of fuel tanks in the ground that are very old that are going to have to comply with new regulations in the next few years. And no one questions the cost of what it's going to cost to take these old fuel stations, these old gas fuel tanks, and either upgrade them, replace them, dig them out of the ground, and upgrade them. That's going to be a huge, expensive project. If we can not do that by investing in EV infrastructure, that's a huge overall benefit to taxpayers. So that's one way for me to look at it, is because I'm looking at all these costs that are coming down the line, and we also have we're going to have to build a new fleet center at some point. And our current fleet center is 65 years old. Which has long outlived its useful life. It's actually a historic landmark in the city of Oakland, but for a parking garage. So it's going to have to go at some point, and it's a really interesting thought experiment to think about, okay, well, let's say this project happens in 5 years from now, and I've got 300 EVs in my fleet. Well, I could design a fleet center that's only for electric vehicles now, because they'll be so prevalent in our fleet. So that means I don't have to think about ventilation for vehicles. I don't have to think about that indoor pollution problem. I don't have to run oil lines like we run in our current fleet center, where we have big oil tanks that come in and we circulate that throughout the building. Like overall, you think about all these cost savings that are going to come down the line by these savings. I know I didn't answer your question directly, but it's a huge one that people don't question the massive cost that's associated with keeping up with gas vehicles.
Well, what you point out, though, is really interesting, and in particular to me, is that your level of view of the organization is really kind of key to identifying those additional benefits and offsetting costs that might have otherwise been incurred. Like your simply knowledge of the projects that would have to come down the line, and being able to present that to management and to electeds ultimately is going to be really quite important. So how have you organized yourselves at the county to give you that kind of level of view to enable you to achieve the goals?
Yeah, I would say actually even broader than that. I think one of the things that we did in terms of my program, my logistics division that I manage, was we reorganized a few years ago. So we absorbed parking operations as well. So we run a fleet and a parking program. And that really helps us look bigger picture, which is from our Board of Supervisors directive to say we want to tackle transportation and mobility as a whole in terms of our county operations. So what's really nice is that I'm able to now look at opportunities to reduce commute impact as part of my program too. So, and there's such a good overlap with fleets. So we can deploy fleet vehicles, for instance, in locations where there's really good Bay Area rapid transit in the Bay Area. We can deploy some fleet vehicles and say, all right, we don't want you to drive to work anymore because our employees put on about 9.5 million miles of personal vehicle travel a year. So we can take a slice into that with some of ours, which means they don't have to drive to work. So we do take a really broader view in terms of mobility, which is really helpful because it's a huge cost impact for our county. And I would say overall, I think it's about 40% of our overall GHG emission portfolio is my program, is transportation.
Well, I think I just want to underscore that as important because what I'm hearing as to this level of view, I mean, there are many municipal and county operations that are still at the level of individual departments managing their own fleets.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
Right.
where you are is so well advanced, and I think offers a view as to where other agencies can go to from both organizational point of view, but also operationally on the ground.
Yeah. I'll just add to that real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, centralized procurement. That's been a huge help for us. So there's a lot of, you're absolutely right. There's so many organizations that do very decentralized fleet procurement where there may be a core list that a central procurement team puts out and the departments have the freedom to go out and buy whatever they want from that list, and then how you manage that. So fortunately, we have a very centralized fleet management system. So when it's time for vehicle replacements, I'm the one making the call, which has been really helpful for me. So, we'll look at a social services agency, for instance, and they have 30 vehicles up for replacement. Like, okay, we're not buying gas cars anymore. So these are all going to get replaced at minimum with hybrids. And then, these 10 are going to have to be electric. And so it gives me a lot of kind of power to be able to do that. Now, of course, there's the human behavior part of it. So once we put them out there, are they actually getting used? So
Right.
we plan for that. But yeah, having a centralized fleet management has been, it's been very, very helpful.
Yeah, it's really important to be able to overcome the organizational inertia of no, we're police, we're different,
Yeah.
right? Or no, we're beach maintenance, we're different. Right?
Yeah.
Whatever that is, that argument is, being able to overcome that by saying,
You don't have a
we'll
choice.
allow you to be different, to
Yeah.
meet your specialized needs, but you're going to do it through this overarching program.
Yeah, and we're going to save the money in the long run too.
So let's talk about the money piece because you get fuel cost savings, clearly.
Oh yeah.
And you
And maintenance savings.
have on your books probably the fuel cost savings
Yeah.
of converting from diesel or gasoline into electric.
Yeah.
But then an electric charge hits the facility,
Yeah.
and that's somebody else's department,
Yeah.
right? And so how do you handle that kind of dynamic between the department heads?
Yeah, so you have hit on a very interesting point. I'm a little hesitant to say this in a public setting because no one has noticed yet, so I'm trying to fly under the radar here. So yeah, I've installed so many stations at other departments where they are absorbing the cost, and we're just letting them do it.
Yep.
But that's not a scalable solution. At some point when we get to mass deployment of EVs in our fleets, we're going to have to come up with a much more sophisticated way of manning electricity as a fuel. I also run a parking program, so my parking budget gets hit when we install charging stations in parking lots and garages, so some of it kind of works out that way. But you're absolutely right. So when we have a facility that, like in my environmental health department, I installed about 12 stations, and they have about a dozen EVs in their fleet over there. Yeah, they're paying for their energy. It gets absorbed into what they pay for their space costs, and that's not well allocated right now. So there's a lot of siloing that still happens. There's not a lot of sophistication to say, this is how much fuel you spent, so we're going to charge it back to you in our budgets. Yeah, that's a big area for growth in terms of sort of the commercial management, and
Sure.
we're just kind of getting away with it for now.
And I mean, we hit on the facility
Yeah.
heads, but then there's also probably an energy manager in the county, and that
Yeah.
energy manager among that person's goals likely has energy conservation,
Yeah.
moving towards net zero,
Yep.
and by adding load,
Oh, yeah.
you complicate that person's effort too, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So when we're doing new solar at a building, that's the first person I talk to and say, by the way, I'm installing 30 charging stations here next year.
Right.
So it's gonna have to be a lot bigger than you think as we fuel switch from gas to energy.
So
Yeah.
taking in this wider scope and knowing when to be wide and knowing when to be narrow seems to be
Yeah.
one of the key challenges or tools in your toolbox as a fleet manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say our energy manager and our general facilities teams have been real allies for us. One thing we did last year is we worked with them, and we now have EV readiness guidelines. So for our internal operations, not for the larger community. So anytime we do work on a parking lot, we're making the thing 100% EV ready. So with 10% EV capable. So we're making sure that the facility is sized enough that eventually the whole parking lot could be electric in the future. Yeah, that's been a huge help.
So tell us any surprises that you've experienced in making this conversion. Are users doing something different than you expected? Are you getting benefits that you didn't see coming?
Yeah. So the HOV lane has been a real benefit. So for a lot of departments, I just sell the fact that they have HOV lane access, which makes sense. The traffic is terrible in the Bay Area. I'm in Southern California. You guys know about bad traffic. That's been a huge saving. So we focus a lot on that when we're talking about benefits to our employees to get utilization. Surprises. I mean, not in the last few years. So we started doing this 6 years ago, and we've had a lot of support, which has been real great. One of my very, very first projects that I did, I think about a month being in the county, was I spent $20,000 and put some experimental technology to make cop cars idle a little bit less, and it just didn't work at all, and we had to take them out. It was a whole thing. So that certainly, there's a lot of trial and error that's still happening with certain unique technology, but the industry as a whole has just moved so much.
Well, tell me a little bit more. Let's dive into that just a little
great.
bit. So police cars idling.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
And so you're suggesting that there's major benefits available from going to electric because of this? How's this work?
Yeah. So anybody run a police fleet in the room? Yeah. Okay. So we put some GPS in a couple of patrol cars, full-on patrol cars, a few years ago, with the support of our law enforcement, but we didn't tell the officers. And then we found that on average, these patrol cars they're at about 50 to 60% idle. So what that means is about half the time that the ignition is on, that the car is on, it's not moving. And that kind of makes some sense because these things are kind of mini, they're kind of mini network servers. They've got so much technology in these cars. They've got radios, laptops, a bunch of things that take power, a bunch of equipment on there, and there's a lot going on in cop cars. So they leave them running for all that power. But 60% is a lot. I mean, that's a lot of fuel being wasted, and there's a lot of opportunity there. So we're making a lot of progress. So in our admin cars and our non-pursuit rated vehicles, we probably have about 90 or so hybrids that have lights and sirens on them too. So these are not the full-on patrol. It's like sort of social services investigators roles and command level staff that operate in emergencies. Those are all hybrids that have lights and sirens. And the really exciting thing is that Ford is a big police car manufacturer. Their model year for next year, for 2020, the default option is going to be hybrid. So that's a really exciting development for that. So it's going to be a huge help. And then down the line, I would love to get these in electric. I would love to get more, or I'd love to get actual inroads in terms of deploying EVs for
So you
police
didn't tell the
cars.
officers at first. Now they know. How do they feel about
Yeah,
this?
we took them out before we told them. But you don't want to affect behavior, right? So the command staff knew, but that data is very valuable.
Yeah.
To kind of see what's going on with those
I like
cars.
this example because it has the multiple layers of benefits, right?
Yeah.
It's fuel cost savings,
Oh, yeah.
it's energy advantages and global warming
Yeah.
benefits,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also those cars are deployed in our communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the emissions that are coming from those tailpipes are happening in our neighborhoods. This is about a better quality of life in our neighborhoods. It's also they're quieter.
Yeah, I mean, your brand is as a government agency, is well on display when vehicles you know, just this morning when I was driving here, I saw a City of Santa Monica fleet vehicle parking for us, and it's a big Jeep Wrangler. It's like, oh, that is a big vehicle for what it's doing.
Point taken.
Friendly jab.
And so, you know, we're fortunate here in California, I think, to have had consistency in our leadership and an electorate that supports these policies and a move towards zero emissions and towards sustainable energy strategies. And you are in a room of folks who are here to support you and what you intend to do next under that same notion.
Yeah.
What will help you get there?
Yeah, anybody involved in policy or software, startup world, new businesses? Yeah. So it's been, I mean, the biggest thing that's gotten us to this point has certainly been the help from local and state grants, investing in fleets to get moving, get some momentum going, get your first EVs and charging stations in the ground. That's been incredibly helpful. We've done a lot of collaboration in the Bay Area among cities and agencies to work together to get these installed, work together to reduce overhead. That's been huge, huge help. We're past that now, so we're done with the initial phase. We're kind of in the low-hanging fruit is done. We're now in like the middle of the tree, I would say. And what we need now is a real focus on management tools. How do we manage large numbers of EVs? And the OEMs are still, you know, when they come and we talk about the new features that they're rolling out in EVs, and like, oh, we've got all this great energy management stuff, and you control it on the screen in the car. I'm like, I've got 80 vehicles, like, or, you know, like I've got 50 of your vehicles. I can't. If someone messes with it, I need more centralized tools. I need better management. So I think that's going to be a real big next step, is for the tools for people who own lots of vehicles in commercial settings to match what we have for gas vehicles. Because those tools have been around for a while. They're really sophisticated. They give us great data to make informed management decisions on where we deploy our cars in general, how we deploy them, where we deploy them, what kind of cars to get. And for EVs, we're just not there yet. We're not there in terms of that wide-scale management.
So for those of us who don't manage gas fleets,
Yeah.
give us a little bit more of a sense for what is the data that you're getting from those fleet vehicles that you're not yet getting from EVs that we can find a way to provide.
Oh yeah, I'll give you the most basic one. I can pull up a report very easily for my 1,200 non-electric vehicles in my fleet. And be like, okay, these cars drove 8 million miles last year, let's just say. I spent 3.2 million on fuel. I can zero in on certain cars and look at why certain ones have low mileage or things like that. That's just not there for EVs yet because of the way that electricity is treated in terms of like a utility level. It's not there to say you spent this much on fuel. We're just not there yet. And that's a really basic problem that needs to get solved.
Again, a good teaser for the next panel.
It's a big one.
And when thinking, so I see software companies, some hands went up. I know there's charging companies in this crowd here. Yeah. Are you using public charging? Are you only relying on your fleet depot charging?
We're on now phase 4 of our EV charging infrastructure deployment. The first few phases were very much focused on opportunities that we could support our fleet and then also support public charging. Because our employees are knocking down my door saying, we want more, we want more. So we installed 10, and then a year later, they got 20 more people that want them. So we focus on opportunities for both, which has been really, really helpful. And for a year or two, we gave the energy out for free, and this was in 2013. Feels like a long time ago. And now we recoup our fees, which has been really helpful because that just kind of goes back into our program. So we focus on both. We deploy public workplace charging, visitor charging, because a lot of our facilities are heavily visited by members of the public, so we've done a lot there. And we've tailored our stations kind of like if you run a fleet, you put the vehicle kind of in the right application. We do that with charging stations too. So in certain applications, we've reduced our power output from level 2 to level 1 because we know a lot of those people are going to stay there all day, and then we give them level 2 options or fast charge options to kind of meet where our customers, our employees are doing.
So at the fleet depots, then the charging solution, having power sharing among chargers is one of the other key.
We're doing our main fleet. We're doing a bunch of different stuff. The one that I'm most excited about that's working great now is we have 37 chargers in our main fleet facility, and that includes one DC fast. And when the DC fast turns on, we partnered through a grant with Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and a firm called Keysensum and ChargePoint, the OEM. We partnered with them to create this new feature wherein the DC fast turns on, and it's publicly accessible, so it can turn on at any time, including 2 o'clock on a summer day, which is what we don't want, but that could happen. And so when that happens, it sends a signal to our fleet chargers in the basement to deprioritize. So they go from level 2 to level 1 to kind of make room for the DC fast, so we can avoid these big demand spikes. And like features like that are what we need. Like that's been really helpful.
Yeah, good work. And so if I'm a user and I've taken a motor pool vehicle and I'm out and driving around the county, can I also access other chargers that are available to everyone else? And do I do that with my fleet fuel card?
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, so fleet fuel card is another integration that needs to happen. They're working on it, but that is certainly that needs to happen. Right now, we just have our credit cards behind the ChargePoint cards that we have. So yes, for a while we were very hesitant to kind of put in the mind of employees that they should think about charging, because when we first rolled out, we wanted them to come back, do a round trip within the range of the vehicle, but then people started getting stranded, and so we had to tow a couple people. So we're like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. So yeah, people can do that. We do a lot of demonstrations, especially on the fast charger infrastructure.
And there's lots of different charging networks out there, so having something that's universal would be a real advantage for you?
Yeah, we haven't gotten that far yet because we are very hesitant to put credit cards in vehicles.
Of course, right.
Yeah,
right.
That's a problem.
Some controlled solution that would be similar to your fleet fuel card.
Yeah, that would ideally, something. So we use like WEX, for instance, as a fuel card provider. So yeah, something like that would happen behind the scenes would be a huge help for us.
So your drivers, they are county employees, but they're also community members.
Yeah.
And many of them have their own cars at home. When they experience the cars in your fleet, what do you find?
Yeah, so that's a real fun point. That's been a real fun part of our job the last couple of years. So we do a lot of ride and drive trainings with employees, and one of the follow-up questions we ask in our surveys is, why did you come to this? What drew you to come to something like this? And a lot of people come for their jobs, which is good. But a lot of folks are like, yeah, I'm a regular motor pool user, but I'm also interested in buying an EV personally. And it's such a great opportunity for you to use an EV at work in a very low-risk situation. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to commit to anything. You're just, I got a meeting in Hayward. I'm going to drive and choose one of the EVs in our fleet and get more familiar with them. And we've done some follow-up surveys where employees have said, I bought an EV because I use them at work and I realized that they're normal cars. Right. So that's been great. And then that coupled with the workplace charging that we provided has been a real help for a lot
Lots of the folks in this room have many years of experience trying to sell EVs, and I think we all know it's about getting butts in seats. Right?
Yeah,
that's what converts a sale.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Well, I think that we're coming up on our time. So, is there anything else you wanted to touch on that I didn't ask you about?
Let's see. I think I'm going to save some of those for my panel.
Yeah,
because I got a lot of juicy tidbits that I would love to deep dive in.
Good work.
But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I think would really help us get to more wide scale. It's been really exciting to see everyone, certainly in the Bay Area, all the cities and counties and other departments, we're all getting started. We're right at that place. It can kind of feel it. Like we're right at the fence there. Yeah. We're about to really go all in. And there's some things that could really help us get there.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time to go into some depth here. I think everyone can agree that these are the kinds of solutions that you're promoting that are ones that we can all take on the road and contribute to the optimism that Terry Tamminen offered for us as the challenge for our industry to solve global warming.
Great. Yeah, well,
thank you very much. A well-deserved honor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Carpenter, who right now is serving as editor, reporter, and producer for KPCC FM's weekday news magazine Take Two, and is the creator of KPCC's weekly transportation segment, The Ride. She's formerly the host of KPCC's weekly series on modern mobility with Alonzo Bowden. Cars, bicycles, trains, buses, motorbikes. If you can ride it or on it, they're talking about it. Sue's also the auto and motorcycle critic for Orange County Register, She's covered cars, motorcycles, and green living as a staff writer for LA Times. She hosts the Will Things that run on KPCC's Take Two every Thursday and has been here speaking before. You probably know who she is, so I welcome her back. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, John. Yeah, this is my 7th year hosting or moderating this panel, and it's really exciting to be back and to see how this whole thing has grown so much. So today we have 2 people who are going to be joining me on stage. We have Anthony Luzi. He's the Director of U.S. Operations for Meccanica. He has more than 20 years experience in the electric vehicle industry, and just this week I was riding their very first vehicle that they're bringing to market here. It's called the Solo, sort of a triple novelty. It is a 3-wheeled, all-electric, single-passenger car. So I would like to have Anthony join me on stage. All right, have a seat. Also joining us up here is Spencer Reeder. He is the Director of Government Affairs at Audi of America. He's responsible for leading the Audi U.S. public policy voice on zero-emissions vehicles. Prior to joining Audi, he worked at Vulcan, where he served as Director of the Climate and Energy Program, and he led Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen's global philanthropic investments in climate, energy, and transportation-related issues. He was also the lead author on the 2014 U.S. National Climate Assessment. So welcome, Spencer. Hello. I would just like to point out that 2 of the lovely vehicles by these 2 representatives are out here today. So we have the battery electric Audi e-tron out here for you to look at and ogle over. And we also have the Solo 3-wheeler, which is just coming on the market as of this weekend. So if you haven't already, I would just encourage you to go out and check those out because those are 2 very exciting vehicles. So you are all here because of the topic of today's panel, which is, are automakers truly committed to low and no emissions technology? But I wanted to start the conversation by just asking each of you to talk about what compelled Audi and then what compelled Electromeccanica to develop these particular electric vehicles right now.
Sure. Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. Both my parents grew up in Santa Monica, so I have some historical connection to this community. It's nice to be down here. Listen, if you've been out to see the vehicle, I think the first thing that strikes you is that it doesn't necessarily look like an electric vehicle. It's a B-class SUV. I think what Audi has made a commitment to, and hopefully this is sort of strikes you as you look at the vehicle, is we're really hitting a very hot sector within the automotive industry right now, this SUV, which accounts for 60% of auto sales in the premium class. It's 54% of Audi sales in the US. So the statement that we're making is this is an everyday vehicle. This is a vehicle that you can use for all of the activities that you would typically buy a vehicle for. It seats 5, it's good for families. We're not putting this out as a niche vehicle. So I would say, you know, the first line, the headline there is, this is an everyday vehicle that really will meet all of your driving needs.
Anthony.
Oh, wait, it's firing up. Hello? There we go. Thank you all for having us here. In regards to ourselves, we're producing a unique vehicle that is kind of an anomaly in the marketplace, but I think it'll become a standard very shortly. It is a single-passenger 3-wheel vehicle that actually is classified as a motorcycle, but all the experience is driving, a standard automobile meaning, and there's some advantages with it in terms of registration and parking. We can park perpendicular, parallel to the curb, and so forth. It is a very small footprint in the urban environment, which gives us the opportunity to reduce the amount of congestion along with the savings of carbon emission. People always say, why don't you make a 2-seater? When are you going to make a 2-seater? Well, that would kind of defeat our purpose because well over 90% of our travel is done single passenger. So much like the Audi is designed to address the use for the whole family, our intention is that when you don't need that vehicle, why use it and transport that much weight through space when you can use our vehicle? And the intention is to to get people to understand, we were just talking about this with Sue, that it's like using the proper tools for the job. You wouldn't use a hammer to put a screw in. So think of our vehicle as supplemental instead of replacing what it is that you're using. And it has many other applications. And I think in terms of the auto industry overall, this will be something that we'll see addressed more as time goes on. We just happen to be the first. And I've been working on this for 20 years, and it's taken this much time to have people go, wow, we get it. So it's kind of like where we're coming from with this.
Yeah, I'm excited that we have two sort of opposite ideas going on up here, serving very specific needs. For Audi's perspective, was it luck that you've got your first battery electric and it's the super hot segment? Or, I mean, the timing could not be more perfect.
Well, clearly it wasn't luck. Audi's been looking at electrified drivetrains for over a decade, and if even you go back farther to the really origins of the company, there was some work with different kinds of drivetrains. So it's been something that's been anticipated. In terms of the specific platform, and I've got some colleagues here in the audience that can probably talk a little bit more about the evolution of thinking. But the trends in terms of this SUV market in the US have been underway for a little while, so I think we had time to assess where it made sense for us as a company to make our first really major play. And if you look at the Q5, for example, that's the best-selling Audi in the marketplace right now. The vehicle you're going to see outside, if you haven't seen it already, is reminiscent of that kind of vehicle. So, I mean, we're not trying to make as I said at the beginning, some sort of niche play. We're really tackling where we think vehicles are selling, and hopefully that resonates with all of you in terms of the seriousness that we're taking this.
So to that point, and the point of this entire panel, which is about automakers' commitment to low and no emissions technology, truly, how do you answer, Audi?
Well, and I know we're just one OEM. I think the question is looking at the industry, and while I'm not here to speak for all of the other manufacturers, I think it's clear, and you've seen a whole sort of rollout of announcements that have been coming out the last year. You're going to see a lot more. Yeah, there's been an inflection point for the industry. And so I think there's little doubt now how serious many of the auto manufacturers are. We've got 4 different models that are going to be out available over the next year or so, 20 battery electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in the next few years beyond that. So there's a clear commitment, and we'll certainly let the actual vehicle sales and the vehicles you're going to see in the marketplace do the talking. But yeah, we're very committed.
And Anthony, you're in a different position because you're not an established automaker.
We're not, and we've always been electric, so we're coming from a whole new perspective in that we don't have the history to sort of precede us into what we're doing. I think that the major auto manufacturers have finally come to a realization that this is here to stay and it's not going anywhere. A number of years ago, there was a lot of patronization to the idea of electric vehicles without a serious commitment. But now we're seeing more and more, thank goodness to you guys out there who are all saying, we like it, it works, infrastructure's developed, and it can support it, and this is the way we should go. And that's aside from all of the environmental issues that we are addressing. This is from a consumer standpoint for utilization even. So I think it's something that's here to stay, and we're in the midst of a revolution that's going to take place.
Yeah, I think if you just look out in the parking lot, we have Nissan out there doing ride and drives, Toyota, Honda, Audi has showed up with a vehicle, we've got yours. And just to put other automakers out there, Hyundai has said it's going to have 18 eco-friendly models by 2025. Kia is going to have 16 electrified models by 2025. Honda says 2/3 of the cars sold in the U.S. are going to be hybrid, plug-in, or fuel cell by 2025. BMW, 12 all-electrics, 13 hybrids by 2025. And what I think is interesting is that 2025 is the year. So can you speak to what's happening in 2025? Like, why is that the marker?
Well, it's 7 years away if you look at the development cycle for most auto manufacturers. There's this sort of pipeline of activity. I would just emphasize that we've got a vehicle next year. We've got 3 others coming within months of that. So we're not looking to 2025. We've got a whole succession plan of vehicles that have been coming out at a fairly reliable sort of clip throughout that whole time. It's 2025 is not when we introduce our big sort of pulse of vehicles. There are some goals that we want to be hitting by 2025, but that is only going to be met because we've been introducing vehicles the whole time.
So can each of you talk about where you hope to be in 2025? Like what part of the market, how many sold?
Well, I'll give you a couple stats. There's a lot. 800,000 vehicles plug-in by 2025. 1 out of every 3 vehicles that Audi sells will be a plug-in by 2025. So those are a couple. There are others, but I can leave you with those.
Anthony?
Again, we're rather unique in that sense that we've always been electric. We will always be electric. That's pretty much what we're all about. Our projections are to see people not only using the single passenger, we are going to be coming out with a 2-passenger 4-wheel vehicle, which is going to address much like Audi's addressing the SUV market, we're going to address those who are interested in having a sort of unique sports car, not an SUV, but a sports car electric, as opposed to having just a family car. So we're looking into the future to create models of vehicles that are going to address specific consumer desires. And starting with the single passenger is really what we're going to base who we are on. And I think once you guys come and take a drive and you see, because there's a lot of questions about it, is it safe? You know, how does it perform? Do I have to worry about being on 3 wheels and so forth? All of that is waived the minute you get behind the wheel and drive, and you see that it's very user-friendly, secure. There's really no problems about safety and so forth. So I think that the future is very bright for us, especially here in the state of California, because California represents about 20% of the consumer market for vehicles. And bringing these cars into this market and having it addressed is going to be, gosh, the wave of the future. Everybody's going to look to us and say, God, look what California is doing. So I'm in support of you guys. Please, keep it up. Look at the charge stations out there. There's not a space available. I love it. Totally love it.
If you drive by the gas stations, you'll notice that gas prices are low. So I'm wondering, like, what is driving the market right now? You have consumers, the economy is raging, gas prices are low. There's awareness about electric vehicles, but there isn't a whole lot of buy-in nationally. So what's driving the market for battery electrics, hybrids, even fuel cells right now? Who are these people? Are we still early adopter phase?
Well, we have early adopters. Like I was saying, I started this 20 years ago with this exact same model, 3-wheel single passenger ZEV. It's taking this long. When I was first, we built a car called the Sparrow. Some of you may be familiar with it. When I first brought that vehicle out, people used to come up to me and say, so how many miles to the gallon does it get? And I go, no, it's electric. Wow, that's really cool, but how many miles to the gallon does it get? And I used to go, okay, well, I see we have a huge learning curve that we've got to go through and bring people up to speed. That no longer exists. When a consumer comes to me, he says, so what's the range of this vehicle? What's your battery pack kilowatt hour on it? And so on and so forth. So you become very savvy. And that's important because now you're going to be able to dictate and challenge whatever it is that we do, because you're going to say, hey guys, can you make something that does this because we need to do that? Once we migrate into this sort of stage of transition, which is somewhat disruptive right now, if you will, is going to be the driving force that brings about the change. Environmentally speaking, it's essential. I mean, whether you want to accept the fact that climate change is taking place or not and that carbon emissions is a major contribution, it is happening. Just look around. So all of us doing our part, aside from what politics are doing, to make this happen, I think is the future. And it's up to guys like us to see to it we provide what you folks need to do the job you need, whatever that is. Whether it's your children going to school, having a private little vehicle to drive, or whether it's your family needing to go out on a camping trip and taking an SUV that gets you there and does exactly what we want.
So Spencer, from Audi's perspective, who buys into an Audi plug-in hybrid or pure battery electric?
Well, not to be overly repetitive, but we think all the people that are looking at the Q3, the Q5, the SUVs, that sort of class of vehicle is going to be interested in this vehicle. We think it makes great business sense. It isn't by accident. It isn't because we're trying to be overly aspirational. There's a real business case here. If you look at year-over-year growth in the battery electric market, it's 47% year-over-year growth this last year. Within the plug-in hybrid, I think it's about 37%. So you see strong, robust growth. If you plot this out, there is an inflection in the adoption curve.
The hockey
so,
stick.
so this is a very good business decision, we think. This is where it's going. There's going to be additional regulatory drivers. We think cities now are contemplating bans. So all of these things, I think, are people that in a very sober way look at the business case are saying that this is a good decision for our business, and this is where things are going. And Audi, frankly, has a tradition of looking at sort of cutting-edge technology. It's part of our tagline. If you go back to the very origins of Audi, we were adopting new and disruptive technology. Probably the one everyone's familiar with is the Audi Quattro technology that you find in this vehicle as well. So this is very much in our DNA. It's something that we're very comfortable doing as well as an automaker. But we're going to do it right, and we're going to do it when the market's ready. The infrastructure's starting to converge into the right spot. So all of these things, year-over-year growth, infrastructure readiness, the technology where Audi wants to be positioning itself in terms of the future. I mean, all of these things are lining up in a nice way. And we think other automakers are seeing the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think that I was on a teleconference a week ago where Mary Nichols was on the phone. She heads the Air Resources Board. And she was saying something that I thought was pretty shocking, which is that awareness of electric vehicles is still less than 50%, which blew my mind. I was like, I thought we've been talking about this for at least 10 years. Doesn't everybody know? But do you still think that there's an awareness issue?
Oh, I think we know there is. How many of you attended the EV Roadmap meeting in Portland, Oregon? I'm just curious, raise your hands. So they do a focus group every year, and I think this was a couple years ago. They had a focus group of individuals who were looking to buy an EV. So these are people that are already self-selected who knew what an electric vehicle was. And they got them into a focus group and were interviewing them about their perception of the technology. And even amongst this group, who knew what an EV was, they thought that the cars were underpowered, that they were uncomfortable and small, didn't perform. So there is a huge awareness that still needs to be, improved upon and overcome. And within California, and Audi just joined this group below is really putting a lot of resources now. There's a number of auto manufacturers that are part of that. It's a nice, interesting group. Mary Nichols is part of that effort as well. So no, clearly education is huge. Audi will do its part in that as well, but it's certainly a hurdle that remains.
Do you think even for the Audi buyership, which just trade in stereotypes here, you're a luxury buyer, more educated, do you think that you still have that hurdle?
Yes. I mean, might our buyers be more inclined to know more about it? I actually don't know, but I would say that is also a reason why we designed this vehicle to look like an Audi vehicle, not like an electric vehicle. So when you go and see this vehicle, you're going to say, that's a nice looking Audi SUV. Oh, and it happens to be electric and it has all these other advantages. So we're not marketing it as necessarily just an electric vehicle. We're marketing this as a superior vehicle that performs, in all these great ways. So, we're not banking on the fact that someone has to be very versant and knowledgeable about electric vehicles to want to buy this car.
And Anthony, how do you overcome the hurdle? Like, you've got some hurdles.
Yeah, we do, but as I was saying before, once the awareness continues to grow more and more as we educate together, I see what we're doing as collaboration, not competition. I think that the consumer, as I said a moment ago, is going to dictate to us a lot of what you're looking to have to fill your needs. We will supply that, and your education will be sort of cross-referencing. We'll feed back on one another. And this is what's going to cause the industry to grow, exponentially. So I really believe that this is a change, and we're experiencing quite a bit of it here in California as the sort of test ground for it. When you go across the country, and I'm sure you've experienced it too, depending where you go, the level of awareness and knowledge varies tremendously. But it takes a core group someplace first that it centers out from, it emanates from. And that's what I think is happening here. We're focused on that here, and we will see to it that you guys become aware of the advantage of a single passenger vehicle. Just come down and take a test drive. That's all I ask. You'll be surprised. I guarantee I'll win you over and you'll consider having one. Now we've brought change. We're going to make things happen that didn't happen because unless you ride a motorcycle, you pretty much haven't thought about a single passenger vehicle. So I think we're right in the niche there. let me
Oh,
tell
I've
you.
thought about a single passenger vehicle.
Yeah, but you're right.
That is true. That's true. But I'm a little bit tired of risking my life, I have to say. So, to the point of what you were saying about the year-over-year growth of battery electric vehicle sales, does that have any impact? This chicken and egg scenario of available models for people to choose from, cars that they actually want to buy, the rate at which they're buying. Does that impact this? These announcements that these companies, I know that you can really only speak to Audi, but whether you're going to roll everything out as you've said?
Oh, it has to. I mean, these, this is a competitive marketplace. There's a lot of analysts that go and look at the data and try to anticipate when the market's in the right spot. And I think what you're seeing by the evidence is that many of the automakers are saying this is the time. Again, the convergence of infrastructure. Yeah, the awareness is lagging, but these vehicles and the battery costs, it's both, it's in terms of a cost for the drivetrains, and all of these things are converging. So we've made the assessment, and I think you see many other automakers making an assessment that now is the time.
And the e-tron is a 50-state vehicle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So talk about mainstreaming. I mean, California, to your point, we are ground zero for this.
Absolutely.
But for this really to succeed, it has to be 50-state.
Yes, yes. And I think once we set the precedent, it will be adopted. California's always been trendsetting in a number of ways. It's just the history of what goes on here, because people are more open and aware of what should be happening for them in terms of their needs in their life. And then all of a sudden, other people look at it and they go, well, geez, that's pretty cool. Look what those guys are doing. And this is how, it grows. The little stone in the water makes a number of rings come out. I think we're on the precipice of an incredible change that's going to revolutionize transportation. I mean, there's no alternative. I mean, what are we going to do? Even if we stuck with gas-powered vehicles, how long do you think we can do it? I mean, it's not infinite, it's finite, right? So we're doing what's really going to be the future. I feel so strongly about this. Like I said, I've been working on this for 20 years. To see what's going on today is phenomenal from my perspective. I just go, my goodness, it's so exciting. I get out there and I go, wow. Every day I want to just push it forward more and more because I see the change, So, and it's to you guys. Bravo, clap to you, Let's all do this together. It's the way I feel.
I think it's very exciting to be in California, where they're sort
Absolutely.
of pushing the envelope on this. But where is, we tend to live in our little California bubble here, feel like rah rah. But where else in the country do you think there's pockets that sort of more likely to follow California's lead most quickly?
Well, we've got strength as a brand, and again, we're not looking at this as an electric vehicle play. I just really want to underscore that. This is an important part of our portfolio. We're going to sell it in all states. The reservation system is open to everyone. We see demand for this kind of vehicle all over the country. So obviously California's got this sort of ecosystem of incentives that make this particularly attractive. But frankly, there's at least for a bit longer, we hope, the federal tax credit. It'll be available to everybody. And other states have other both carrots and sticks. So those will drive the market in various ways. But frankly, we think this vehicle will sell regardless of the combination of incentives. We think it's a compelling vehicle. So we're not banking on a particular incentive in one particular jurisdiction to drive sales. That will be helpful, and we'll certainly support those. But this is a 50-state play for us. Yeah, it's a global play, frankly.
Okay. Where else are you seeing strong interest? I know that you said everybody's interested, but is there any state that you can sort of point to as being also
I
progressive?
would hold off on that because I don't think we have all the data. The reservation system just opened up less than a month ago. So we're getting, I think globally we have about 16,000 reservations. So, give us a little bit of time to see how this all shuffles out, and as we get closer to launch, I think we'll be happy to talk about where this is happening. But we were expecting to see it across the board.
So you brought up incentives. How important is that to getting something off the ground, which has a slightly higher price point?
Okay, so what do I want to say here? I might defer to my colleague Matt here. They don't hurt, obviously. We price this vehicle to sell in the marketplace. I think that's the point. If you look at the price, the competitors, internal combustion engines or electric vehicles, we've priced the Audi e-tron to sell in any situation. So we're not relying on any kind of tax incentive. That will help our numbers as it will everyone else that's selling these kind of vehicles, so that's great. But if those were removed, we still think this vehicle will sell. So we didn't price it in the sense that we were having to count on this to sell the vehicle. If all of a sudden we lost all of the incentives, we still think this vehicle will sell quite well.
And eventually you will.
And eventually we will.
Right.
Yeah.
And how about you? Because you actually get an incentive too from the California.
Yes, California is one of the few states that offers an incentive for our classification, which is motorcycle. The federal government does not. Whereas with Audi, you could, with the e-tron, receive the federal and the state. We only have the state. So we're not incentive driven. We're market driven in the sense that we want to put in your hands what we believe is going to be advantageous to you. And once again, when I say when you experience single passenger transportation, you'll understand that better. But we're not incentive driven. So we see at our price point of $16,000, and the state now has just upped for motorcycle to $900 from $750. We're the cheapest thing in the marketplace for an electric car. And it will definitely, almost everyone in this room, I'm sure, could find a use for it. So I don't have the necessary concern that a manufacturer, OEM like Audi does, because they've been addressing a specific demographic for a number of years. They know where they're at within that, and the incentive helps or may not help. I know a lot of people initially were motivated because when you saw a $45,000 price tag on a Leaf, you were like, oh my goodness. But when you received a $10,000 or $12,000 rebate from combined sources, all of a sudden it became entertaining, and it got a number of people buying that product and putting it in the marketplace. And that started the whole idea of the concentric ring. And then everybody said, geez, it works. So are we incentive driven? No, we would love to have more, obviously, because it puts more cars in your hands and helps us grow too. But we're not necessarily motivated by that to see to that we sell cars.
Can we talk a little bit about infrastructure and the role that plays in people's decision to buy an EV?
Yeah, it's critical, and if any of you paid attention to our announcement with the e-tron, you also heard about the partners that we brought forward as part of that announcement. Electrify America, which is installing DC fast charging stations up to 350 kilowatt. Charging the e-tron, I'll just remind folks, will be the first vehicle on the market that can charge at 150 kilowatts, so 80% charge in 30 minutes roughly. So that's significant. But I think the last count that I looked at, there's 22,000 charging locations in the U.S., representing 60,000 roughly ports. So again, this is the right time, we think, from that major infrastructure play, and it's only going to get better. And then from the, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, most charging is done at home or at the workplace. So we also announced the partnership with Amazon Home Services, so that when you buy an e-tron, you'll get that reliable installation that's backed up by Amazon's happiness guarantee and the vetting of their electrician. So we're trying to make it really easy for folks that want to buy this car to really lower the barriers of entry. And you'll have a 9.6 kilowatt charging option there that'll hook into your 240 volt, 40 amp system that's standard in all homes. So again, we think it's getting easier and easier, both from the major infrastructure play for DC fast charging and the proliferation of those stations, and from really just lowering the barrier with the partnership like we're announcing with Amazon for home charging, which is where most people are going to charge their homes. And of course, we want to make sure we're penetrating into the multifamily apartment dwellers as well. And so that's where the public infrastructure becomes quite important. Cities like Los Angeles, in California, there's lots of investment, as we all know, going into public charging here. And that's why the partnership with Electrify America is so important as well.
Yeah, I'd say that multifamily is just a huge obstacle. I can't tell you, I feel like half of the colleagues that I work with at KPCC consult with me about buying a car. Everybody wants an electric or a plug-in, and they all live in apartments, and they're like, I can't do it.
How many chargers do you have at your office?
Believe me, I've been lobbying. I think I might have finally convinced them. I mean, we are a supposedly progressive radio station. But anyways, from your perspective, Anthony, what do you think about the importance of infrastructure, having more chargers?
I think it's paramount to the success of the whole electric program. We see it growing leaps and bounds, especially with the we were just talking about municipalities partnering with a lot of charge station companies like ChargePoint and the like. So I think that's going to be a real important issue as we migrate across the country. My experience, when you ask, like, what's your demographic where you've seen the largest amount of concern or interest in your product, ours has been along the West Coast primarily. We have hotspots throughout the country, generally where they're urban environments where the education level is a bit higher, and they are ready to adopt, except that a lot of them may have reservation because they don't know what to do about charging. In our case, you can charge 110, you know, simple household outlet, and you can get the car charged up with 80% reduction in about 3 to 4 hours. And on a fast charge, or I should say a 220 charge, you're looking at half of that time. And when we get the fast charge, it's going to be half of that time. So our car, in terms of being able to literally plug and play, if you will, is going to be right there because we charge quick. But if you don't have access to that, then it becomes cumbersome because people say, like in an apartment building, what can I do? Will they let me plug into my garage downstairs? I don't know. That takes me back to legislation. So if you look at things like what Envoy's doing, when they go and they set up legislation with municipalities that require developers to automatically include electric charging infrastructure into their new buildings, then we start to see the ability for everybody to have that resource at their disposal. And that's when you're going to see a lot of change, because we can put public stations everywhere, but what happens when you have to go home and you're living in a multiple dwelling facility? So we've got to get those in place. And I think that that legislation is going to be very important. They're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, I leased a Nissan Leaf back when I was covering cars for the LA Times. It was my personal vehicle. It was back at the very beginning of 2012. And I went to work and plugged in the garage, and I came out, and they had turned off all the outlets in the garage.
Oh,
so I
geez.
feel, and this is something that I've heard from these colleagues of mine who have landlords who are just not educated to understand that it really is not going to impact your bill. Like, I don't know what they're thinking is going to happen to their electricity. It's really fascinating. I feel like that's another whole tier of education that needs to happen, not just the buyer, but these people who are managing properties beyond the developers, because I think they know.
Developers, actually. And what I would think is going to happen in the future is that municipalities are going to start educating them and showing them that this is really important to the success of the community, and also in offering them incentives in some way, tax deductions and the like, will cause this to grow at a much more rapid rate. And it's very important that we pay attention to that, because we're the ones that are going to see to it that that kind of legislation is put in place. Santa Monica, incidentally, has been very good about adopting that now with their developers. They have a requirement for X amount of units to have X amount of charge stations to go in there. Now we're looking to go back and see if we can retrofit those that were there with the same program, see if they'd be willing. The owners of those properties are a bit reluctant because they go, my goodness, what's this going to mean to me? Well, now they get the incentive from the state and federal government to do that. All of a sudden, it starts to grow, like I said, exponentially, and we're all being able to go anywhere we need and plug when we can. So that's the real key. You know, not just between guys like us that are trying to do it from an OEM standpoint, but we've got to get the municipalities, counties, federal, state government involved to help us with this.
That's what I think is so interesting about Electrify America, and I'm hoping that Spencer can sort of talk a little bit more about that. So Electrify America is the subsidiary that VW set up to help distribute the money to promote EVs, infrastructure, awareness, things like that. So they just announced their latest investment plan last week. Can you talk about where the money's going to go?
Well, I'm not going to go through all the details because I don't speak for them. I will just let everyone know, if you don't already know, that it's a $2 billion investment over 10 years. I think in this initial phase, we're going to see something in the order of 500 charging stations by, I think, mid-next year, nationally. So this is a very significant effort on their part. It's going to be open to everybody. It's a CCS, which I think will represent 85% roughly of the vehicles that can be able to charge into this network. So it's really a broad play that'll benefit everybody, which is great. It's what we need as a country. We need to continue to lower these barriers to entry, and so this is quite significant, and we're really happy to be partnering with them.
Yeah, I mean, California's getting 800 million, which is quite exciting.
There you go.
So, go ahead. You
I
have
was
something
just
to
going to say, there you go. I mean, and earmarking that specifically to do things like putting in infrastructure for charging or encouraging other kinds of legislation that will support that.
And multifamily, like we
And
were discussing.
exactly. I mean, that's the future. So speak up, guys. You know,
So
gotta
I would
talk
like
about it.
to very quickly turn our attention to some of the stuff that has been happening on the federal political level and how
Mm-hmm.
that's affecting your plans to bring EVs, battery electrics, fuel cells to market, and that is NAFTA renegotiation. You're a Canadian company, even though you're setting up shop down here. Anybody want to take that question, how it's going to impact your ability to fulfill your promises?
right now it's not going to impact ours because we've sort of planned ahead, if you will. We don't know what the future is going to hold. But regardless of what that is, we're not going to stop. We're going to continue to move forward. There can be a consequence in terms of price, perhaps, just like with the tariffs and every other thing that's going on in our country with regards to being able to offer consumer advantage. But for right now, we're kind of pat with it. We thought about that a little bit ahead of time since we were a Canadian company that's coming into the U.S. market and ultimately going to be manufacturing and distributing here in the U.S. So we've kind of prepared ourselves. But it is an issue that we have to be aware of, one that's going to be more problematic probably for you guys because, you know, as an international company.
Well, actually, the new NAFTA is fine. And we're
You're good
fine.
with it
We've
too,
got
yeah.
manufacturing in Mexico for the Q5, and we're used to this sort of international landscape of different trade agreements and all of that. So, listen, if you can make improvements in NAFTA, that's great. Audi will sort of adjust to whatever the realities are, but we're not overly concerned with at least what we know about the new NAFTA agreement. I mean, in general, we're supporters of free trade, as most OEMs that have an international footprint are. We think it's good for the business. We think it's good for consumers because it ultimately results in a lower purchase price for folks. So, you know, the barriers introduced by new tariffs and all of that we don't think is really beneficial for anybody in this ecosystem that's trying to get new technology to market, electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. These kind of tariffs are probably only going to make things a little bit more expensive for the consumer, and we're trying to increase numbers. So, you know, our view is let's keep free trade. Let's make sure we make improvements where they're needed, and we support that as well. But no, in terms of the specifics around the new NAFTA agreement, we're fine with that. I mean, it'll require a little bit more North American content, but that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where is the battery electric e-tron made?
It's made, thank you for asking, I should have talked about this. It's made in Brussels. It's a plant that's been fully converted 100% to only manufacturing electric vehicles. This is no small feat. We converted a plant that was building another vehicle. While they were building that vehicle, we converted it to a facility that would only produce electric vehicles. Massive investment. And I will say it's also certified carbon neutral, this facility in Brussels. I just toured it about a week and a half ago and saw the e-tron coming down the line, and it's super excited. It's something to behold. And, you know, a whole new robotics line in terms of pulling together the battery pack, and so it's really exciting. But yeah, it's this facility will only make BEVs. And then I think if you look at the wider group, I think by 2030 there'll be 16 facilities across the various brands that are going to be making electric vehicles. So this is a big commitment on the manufacturing side. And
tariffs are having no effect?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the steel and aluminum, I won't get into all the details of those, but that's certainly impacting everybody. So Audi's not unique here. These steel and aluminum tariffs are not helpful to anybody in the industry.
Okay. And do you expect it to impact the price of the battery electric EV?
Not in preference to anything else in the market. I think it's going to equally affect all of our products and everyone's products that's making international. It has an international footprint. So yeah, it's going to, and even the domestic manufacturers are telling the administration it's going to impact their price point as well. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Trump administration rollback of CAFE standards. Is that going to impact any plans for battery electrics, hydrogen fuel cell? I know that you can't speak to hydrogen fuel cell, that's not your thing, but do you think that that's going to impact Audi's plans?
No. I mean, will it impact demand? Sure, it could. Fuel prices are going up. This week, we're over $4 a gallon here in California. I think there's still going to be market pressures to push people into these vehicles, regardless of what happens with CAFE. We think there needs to be one national program. We support California's leadership. It doesn't make sense to have this sort of fight from our view. Those of us at Audi believe in climate change. We know that the fuel efficiency needs to improve, that we need to reduce greenhouse gases, so there's no doubt about that, and Audi will respond to the societal response to this existential challenge. And so we're very much in as a partner to try to provide solutions to make sure we have more sustainable transportation. There's no doubt about that. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Anthony, did you want to add anything?
No, I go back to, it's really about collaboration here. It's not about a competition or one trying to succeed over the other and be king of the mountain. This is about all of us working together to make this change, which we know is essential, happen. How corporations like ourselves here do that for our communities is paramount, and we have to pay attention to that and contribute as best we can. You guys are in this with us. We're all in this together. Let's make it happen.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Don't be dismayed by my papers up here. It's very large font, double-spaced. It'll be quick. Just out of curiosity, apart from some of the folks here from Electra Meccanica, how many Canadians do we have in the room here? Okay. I work at the Canadian consulate here in Los Angeles. I cannot do a day without meeting Canadians in meetings or somewhere. We're actually the largest diaspora of Canadians here in California outside of Canada. So it is very cool. Thank you. So as I mentioned, Patricia Elliott, I'm the Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner here in Los Angeles at our consulate. And on behalf of the Consulate General of Canada, I would like to thank the AltCar Expo organizers, as we are very proud to be here and supporting Electra Meccanica. And a big congratulations to Jerry and Anthony and your team for what you're doing here. Electric Meccanica is yet another example of how Southern California and Canadian companies are working hand in hand on projects protecting the environment and combating climate change with one common goal, and that's a greener future. For the Government of Canada, clean technologies and innovation is essential for our Canadian prosperity. We're a trading nation, but we want to do it in a very clean and green way going forward. Just to give you an example, locally here in California, Canadian foreign direct investment has poured nearly $70 billion since 2007, and 1.2 million jobs depend on trade and investment with Canada. And the bilateral trade of goods represents $44 billion. So every day between Canada and the US, you have $2 billion worth of goods and services going back and forth across the border. And we're proud we're the US's #1 customer, and we hope to keep it that way. On a policy level, and you've probably been hearing a lot of that too, Canada continues to play a global leadership role in tackling climate change and growing a cleaner economy. We'll continue to work with the US on every level, including partners at the subnational level and in the private sector, to address climate change and promote clean growth. We will continue always to advance shared action on environmental issues, including through collaboration on clean technology development and innovation, such as what you do. That being said, once again, welcome to the Golden State, Electra Meccanica, and I can't wait to test drive one of those automobiles. Thank you very much. And so we have here an award to Meccanica celebrating automotive innovation and green technology for the Solo EV, the newest export from Canada to the US. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You want me to say a little something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. It's greatly appreciated. It's a sort of a confirmation of what we're trying to do when we get things like this. And all I can say is, once again, I encourage you guys to please come down. We opened up a new dealership here in Studio City on Ventura Boulevard at Colfax. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have it up and running. I offer a test drive to anybody and everybody that would like to come down, and I think you'll be won over. I can assure you, from my opinion. But thank you very much again for this.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's with great honor that the NAFA, and particularly the Pacific Southwest chapter, every year we look at some of the students that are in the automotive space to help them with some of their costs of going to school. So this year we actually selected 2 students from Cerritos to give we gave them an $800 scholarship. And can Andrew and John come up to the stage, please? So one of the things we realized a long time ago, as the fleet and maintenance and mobility space is changing, so too is the need of the people that maintain it. So these students, well, right now apologize, represent the future of who's going to take over the fleets, who's going to repair the fleets, who's going to actually work on some of the changes that we foresee, the electric vehicles, the autonomous vehicles, and as those changes go, so too is the need of the skills of the mechanics and the people working on it. So we're hoping that actually would that this helps to that end. So with that, this is to John Hahn. Thank you very much. And again, we appreciate it. And one of the things, and I haven't told the rest of the NAFA chapter, we want to invite you to our next NAFA meeting. That's at the LA Auto Show. And we'll certainly try to interact with you and see what we can do with our network and with our members to help you advance to that end. Okay? Thank you.
My name is Matthew Hall. I'm the editor of the Santa Monica Daily Press. We're the local newspaper here in the city of Santa Monica. We're here for a panel discussion today with 4 experts from varying parts of the alternative fuels industry. Some of them actually make vehicles, some of them purchase vehicles, so hopefully we'll get a good diversity of opinions on several subjects. Starting here on my right, which is your left, we have Anthony Luzi, correct? Correct. Pronunciation correct?
Correct, you got it.
Excellent. Next we have Rick Tibay, Rose Wang, and Phillip, how do I pronounce your last name? Kobernick? Excellent. So I'm going to let them make their own introductions real quick, and then we'll get into some questions and hopefully some good discussion for you. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Glad to see you here today. I am the Director of U.S. Operations for our new company, Meccanica, which produces the single-passenger vehicle. I'm sure some of you have seen it outside, called Solo. We're opening up our first distribution dealership in Studio City on Ventura and Colfax. I invite all of you down. Please come, go for a test drive. We've been manufacturing vehicles for some 60 years, not only under Electromechanica, which we are now, but Intramechanica. So we have an extensive history in the sort of automotive industry and producing very specialty cars. I think you'll find the Solo to be right up there in the quality with everything we've done in the past. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Tibay with LA County. I am a recycled fleet manager. I've been in fleet for more than 40 years. Currently, I work on infrastructure for the electrification of transportation, and that's pretty much it for me.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Rose, and I am the CEO of InMotion USA. InMotion is a high-tech enterprise specializing in the development and design of electric personal vehicles. And so we have a micro-mobility fleet consisting of electric skateboards, electric scooters, electric bikes, and our best seller is actually the category of electric unicycle. And we actually have a tent out there right outside of this panel. So as you walk out, you'll be able to see our InMotion flag, and you can stop by to check out any of our products.
So my name is Phillip Kobernick. I'm the logistics and fleet manager for Alameda County, which is in the East Bay, in the San Francisco Bay area, kind of Oakland, Hayward, that whole area. So I oversee our vehicle fleet of 1,300 vehicles, of which we're trying to move off of gas as soon as possible, and our internal commuter program for our 10,000 employees, and a couple of our oddball things, but basically any way that our employees get around.
Thank you, panelists. So we're going to start off with just a generic question to warm everybody up and set the stage a little bit. Maybe we start with you, and we'll go down this way. So the icebreaker question for everybody is, how do you describe the current health of the alternative fuel industry?
Yeah, it is exciting. It feels very, very healthy. So I started in this role about 6 years ago, and the things that we were adding to our fleet, because we love experimenting with stuff and putting new vehicles and see how they do in our fleet. You know, we had a lot of experiments and 6 years ago. This is new stuff. We converted like a truck through a guy down the street to be a plug-in hybrid, and now like there's actual people that are making that at real stage right now, and so that's great. I would say it's very exciting. We've seen all the OEMs, the major manufacturers release many new different EVs that we can buy as customers. We can put them into different applications. We can put them all over the place. So I would say it's a really exciting place. I think if we were to sort of think about it in like a lifespan metaphor, I think it feels like we're in the teenage years, kind of. We've grown out of the young years, but we're not quite there yet. You know, it feels like there's a lot of room for growth, especially in the business side of things. In the B2B market, there's a lot of area to grow when it comes to managing lots of electric vehicles beyond just the individual consumer market. The fleet and commercial market has a lot of room to grow. But I think it's really exciting. It's real easy to get those in our fleet these days.
Absolutely, and I agree with Phillip. From our standpoint of micromobility, we see it as an emerging industry. From what I've seen this year with Bird and Lime taking over in various parts of the country, more people have been taking personal transportation on as something that they never knew they needed, right? And so from our standpoint, it's really exciting because our entire motto is really to encourage more people to take on sustainable personal transportation to alleviate urban congestion as well as decrease carbon emissions. And so from our standpoint of a manufacturer as well as designer and creator, it's very exciting for us to go ahead and expand that market, expand the audience so that we can create way more products that cater to each individual viewpoint.
I'm going to say that the U.S. market is behind the curve. If you look at what's happening in China, if you look at what's happening in Europe, they are much quicker to embrace the change that we are going to see. That said, there's a lot of change happening within industry, and probably the really obvious ones that everybody knows about are going to be either the plug-in hybrid cars that we see today, some electrics, or the transit buses, which should be making significant penetration in the LA area. But what's really coming is the commercial trucks, and you're seeing major manufacturers, people like Cummins, people like Volvo and Freightliner, really stepping up and getting into the market because it's happening already in Europe, it's happening already in China, and it's just a matter of time, regardless of the administration in DC, before it happens here.
Yeah, I would say that the environment is healthy, especially here in the state of California. And to go along with what you're saying, I think that it's important that we continue doing what we're doing here because it is accelerating at a rapid rate, and that's fantastic. But we should be aware of the fact that we're kind of a microcosm within the whole scope of what's taking place, and we need to be a driving force, a leading force for that, I believe anyway. And if we do that, it can kind of exponentiate out through this country, which is what I hope happens. But as far as it goes here, I think it's quite healthy, and addressing, as you were saying, alternate forms of utilizing this technology from giant hauling trucks like Thor, the company that's an independent that just started making the diesel truck. Tesla's also making one. It shows us the versatility of the technology and how it can be implemented in a number of ways other than just consumer vehicles. And that's where I think the real growth is going to come for us.
Thanks. And so as several people up here, specifically Rick and Rose, have alluded to, that this industry is more than just four-door family sedans, right? There's a whole diversity of kinds of transit out there. So, and we can start with you, Rick, in this case. What do you think the current regulatory framework here in California has done to either encourage or stymie the development of those kinds of new and interesting vehicles?
That's a great question. So I have really mixed feelings about this. The state has done a lot that's really promoted the adoption of the electrification of transportation. Probably first and foremost is carpool access, followed by rebates. Those have made tremendous differences. The problem in the LA region is that some of the carpool lanes are far too clogged, and so they are now restricting or rescinding the old green and the white stickers are being sunsetted, and so they will no longer have carpool access. And the concern I have there is that the lower income and those who live in disadvantaged communities who buy in the secondary market rather than the primary market are going to lose one of the major benefits of the vehicles. So that I see as a hindrance. Another hindrance that I see is from the DMV regarding autonomous vehicles, but I believe that's changing. But on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give them a 9. They've done a lot of good, and so I wouldn't be too critical of the things that I think they haven't got quite right yet.
I'll go to Anthony next, and I'll come back to you, Rose. So, as a vehicle manufacturer, how do you feel about that? Do you think that the regulatory framework is encouraging you to diversify and look at different options?
In the state of California, again, I think it's well along the way. It's very developed. The incentive programs for manufacturing are in place. I like the idea that the current administration in Sacramento is very interested in making this the electric manufacturing capital of the world for vehicles in general. Taking that kind of initiative is what really encourages others to start to follow suit. There are several other states in the union that look to California as a guidance to go forward with what they're trying to do. So I think the continuation of that here in the state is very important. There are a number of other things that could happen too that I think once we start manifesting this to a greater extent, it will grow quite rapidly and we'll really see some immense change. That's when we can start putting pressure on DC to see to it that we get this implemented nationally, because that's really what we need.
Thanks. So, Rose, I know you're not Bird and Lime, you're not the scooter people, you're not the reason that sidewalks are clogged or whatever the problem may be, right? However, of the folks up here, you're closest to that model than anyone else. So I'd be interested to hear what you think municipalities can do regulatory-wise to adapt to such a fast-moving, disruptive force, such as those two companies, but also from the manufacturer's perspective, when you're looking at the regulatory frameworks, which sometimes are vague, sometimes are fuzzy, right? Is that an opportunity or is that an obstacle for a manufacturer when they're looking at rolling out new devices?
To answer your second question first, so I definitely think it's an opportunity for us. The model that we take on with our business is an educational model to educate not only the masses but also our consumers about what the etiquettes are for taking on one of our devices onto the road. So we try to encourage people to wear helmets. We encourage people to mind traffic signs and basically common sense, right, that you think people would have, but because of Bird and Lime, there has been some negative impressions towards the micromobility movement, and so we're really trying our best to take on that educational role to reverse that. And so for us, I think the main problem with micromobility where it is right now is infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure here in the US to take on the additional personal devices as we do in, let's say, Europe or Asia. The roads here are built for cars. And so to really encourage more people to take this personal device on as a realistic way of commuting from work to home or vice versa every single day, it will take a lot of encouragement as well as government participation to encourage people to do that. And I think within the LA district, you would think that, you know, with Bird and Lime popping up, that this will become a bigger conversation. But as it stands right now, there's definitely a long ways to go in terms of encouraging more people to take that on.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add on to the question about state agencies and local agencies, and make sure we're giving credit where credit is due, because California agencies have been making it really easy to implement advanced fuel vehicles here in the state. I don't know what I would be doing if I was a fleet manager in a jurisdiction that was not located in California. So to give kudos where kudos are due, like the California Vehicle Rebate Project, which you as an individual consumer can get a rebate for buying an EV. Last year, you know, we were getting $10,000 off per sticker price on EV from the state because my fleet is located in disadvantaged communities. If you want to be able to put EVs in your fleet, the state is making it very easy for you to, or much easier for you to do that with these types of incentives, and that's coming from the state through the CVRP program. If you're buying bigger vehicles, they have the Hybrid Voucher Incentive Program, or HVIP. These are just online forms, essentially, to get them as fleet managers. Local jurisdictions like air quality management districts in the Bay Area have been investing heavily, working with fleet partners to get these high mileage vehicles that are clean air technology on the road. And there's just been a lot of local and state investment here, and it's been instrumental in getting the early adopters to get going. So, you know, if there's any state agencies here, thank you.
Sure. And so you mentioned a lot of things there regarding sort of rebates and the making it easier to purchase and acquire the vehicles. Earlier, you had mentioned that this is sort of teenage years for the industry and that we're getting there to growing up. So going back to the idea of infrastructure, what do you think needs to happen infrastructure-wise to move this industry from its teen years into its adulthood?
So I guess I'm going to answer that by saying there's a lot of really good momentum happening on the public infrastructure side for EV charging. That's going to keep going. Utilities like Southern California Edison was here yesterday and talking about the investments that they're doing in public infrastructure. For me in the Bay Area, PG&E is really investing and putting a lot of public charging stations in. There's EVgo. There's a lot of things happening. So I would say, separate from that, private business, startups, help us out here. Help out commercial fleet managers. Give us some new tools that we can use to manage large amounts of EVs, because the market has been very focused on individual consumers, people buying one EV for their home to park in your garage. And you know, you don't need a lot of, you can get some funny tools with that, you can have some cool things, but when you manage hundreds of EVs, we need management tools, and we need startups to get in that space and help out large fleets, and you know, we'll pay for it. We pay for that for gas vehicles. We just need those ventures to kind of get into place.
Sure. So, you know, Anthony, you guys are a manufacturer of vehicles. What do you do on the infrastructure side? Do you work with, are you out there looking for startups to partner, to help encourage people to put in chargers? What are you doing aside from making the vehicles to try and find ways to improve the infrastructure that will be used for your vehicles?
We absolutely do. We work with a number of companies. Whoever has a decent idea, we'll look into it and see how it might be advantageous to the utilization, not only our product, but integration into an existing structure. And they vary tremendously. I think to address one of the points you were bringing up is that finding ways that we can manage the fleets is important. We've looked at this from our vehicle because to address your point, we're single passenger, so we kind of fall right in the same category of what you're trying to do in terms of sort of rolling out the idea of being a solo user of a vehicle to accomplish what you need to go. So with that in mind, in our vehicles, what we're trying to do is build in a sort of a connectivity with a fleet management company that would allow you to monitor the use of that vehicle, report data back to you constantly, give you the ability to Wi-Fi into it and check out what's going on with it, all of that. And that's going to happen with software development. And that's one of the things we're focusing on and trying to work to bring across. It would also help your situation, too, to monitor your vehicles as they're all over the place and people are saying, geez, you know, we're finding them on the street corners by the dozens. What do we do? It would help you know where that was and what you could do about it. And I think that is paramount, to be honest with you, to the fleet involvement. And we're focused on that.
Oh, just to add on to that, Anthony. So talking about, you know, the sharing economy of the scooters that are out there, I think it's important to note that the scooters that are currently being used by the scooter sharing economy are direct-to-consumer scooters. They're not really made for this sharing economy. So there is a difference between, you know, establishing, hey, there's some sort of issue with this whole service versus they're maybe not using the correct product that they're trying to roll out the service for. And so we are absolutely aware of that, and we're looking into developing our own scooter sharing model for that specific purpose.
So you're our local representative, Los Angeles. I don't know how, I'm assuming many of you here are from this area, from this region. If you're from Santa Monica, you may have followed this. You know, we have EV charging stations here in the Civic Center lot. We've got them at the beach lot. There has been a significant discussion and controversy around the inability for the municipality to incentivize putting charging stations in multi-unit housing because those rebates that we get from the utility provider have very specific restrictions and rules on them. So I'm interested from your perspective, what can be done to encourage those consumers or change that mindset to bring, you know, the hundreds of thousands of folks who live in multi-unit housing into the fold for these new kinds of vehicles?
That's a really interesting question. So the state of California adopted a green building code. Green building code is actually part of the state building code. It sets a floor, it's minimums for building standards. So if you're doing a project and it's $200,000 or more, then there's a requirement to put in at least the capability for EV charging in multifamily and in commercial lots. And currently for a commercial lot, it's 8%. So at one site, we're doing a repaving of one of our work sites, has 325 parking spaces, and we are going to be electrifying 36, and we're putting in the provision to add another 25 at that site. And that's going to be part of that project for that particular site. Probably one of the biggest opportunities, the missed opportunities, or has been a missed opportunity, is putting in infrastructure at workplaces. It does a couple of things. For multifamily, it may be the difference for many people if they're able to charge at work, to be able to actually have a plug-in vehicle. Without that, if you look at the numbers, just going to the numbers, there are 3.4 million households in LA County, and 45% of those 3.4 million live in multifamily. So they may not, probably don't have access to charging at their home. Most of the people who have embraced electric vehicles are in single-family homes with access to charging. So it makes a huge difference. The other thing the workplace does is, you know, people like us can get up and we can talk about electric vehicles. We can talk about all kinds of stuff. When you talk to your coworker who actually has that new Tesla 3 or has the i3, it's totally different conversation. They see how easy it is to charge, and they hear about everything else. So it gives them a much greater opportunity. The county has more than 100,000 parking spaces in its facilities, and I would tell you our personal goal is to get to about 20% electrification. There isn't a date on that, but that's the target. So we're really looking looking at the low-hanging fruits. We're participating with Edison in their Charge Ready program and putting these in at scale. So that probably isn't a direct answer to your question, but Green Building Code requires if you're in I've forgotten what the minimum numbers are because I haven't been heavily involved, but if you have more than 4 units, then you have to start looking at least putting in the conduit and having a circuit for EVSEs if you're doing a substantial remodel, and that really paves the way for someone adding something later.
Yeah, I have a comment on that also. I think it becomes important that we look at legislation that will require developers to automatically consider placing charge stations into whatever facility that they are building, be it commercial or be it residential. So that in the end, what happens is for every 5 units you build, you have to have a charge station or 10 units, and that becomes part of the municipality's code, and the Planning Commission oversees it and sees to it's done. And now we start fanning that out across the spectrum for both commercial and also for residential, because we want to be able to provide you the opportunity to take your vehicle to work and charge it also if your company is going for that. And that's what it's been up to this point. The company needs to make that decision as to whether they're going to provide that. But if a municipality or the state makes it mandatory, that's something entirely different. Then they have to abide by it. And that's the kind of stuff we have to put in motion to really get this out into the world in broader spectrum.
That's what the Green Building Code does. So it sets that floor.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for a commercial property, that floor is 8% of the parking spaces.
Yeah, also just to add, the range on EVs is getting a lot better. So a couple years ago, in our fleet, we would put in vehicles that had an 80-mile range, and we had to charge those every day for our employees to use as part of their day-to-day jobs. And so our vehicle-to-charger ratio was closer to 1-to-1. Now that the range, you can get a new car that has 230-mile range on it. We don't need to charge it every day. We try to, but it's not as necessary. So we're able to get more vehicles than we have chargers available. So ultimately, what that means is we don't have to worry about charging it every day. So then the range is just going to keep getting better and better and better. So that's just that's happening on its own, but will be helpful. So we don't have to worry about having infrastructure for every single vehicle.
Sure, and Rose, in your case, so we are talking about cars here a lot, but that doesn't, your vehicles are not cars, right? So for the micro transit option, like what are the range on your vehicles? What are the range on the micro mobility options? Is charging a concern for your customers?
I think it depends on what they use it for. So on a daily commute, you're really within an urban space, you're really looking at a 5 to 10 mile range, which all of our products have. Our newest flagship electric unicycle goes up to 60 miles on a single charge and 25 miles per hour max speed. And so you're really looking at something that is comparable to an electric car. For our electric bikes, it goes up to 100 miles on one charge. So if you are really commuting a long distance in between where you are from A to B, then yeah, that would be an issue. But because we don't need the parking space for charging, you can just take it into your office and charge right there. Or everything comes with chargers that you can just plug into the wall outlet. So the infrastructure of building EV spaces doesn't necessarily apply to us, but like Phillip said, this technology is just getting better and better over time. Before, when the electric unicycle was invented in 2011, range was 10 miles, 15 miles. And now in 2018, we're looking at an electric unicycle that goes up to 60 miles. So as time goes on and more investment is made into the development of this technology, we can definitely see micromobility with longer range and also much portable sizes.
So I just want to follow up on something here, and this may be only of interest to me, but my knowledge of how the California Vehicle Code relates to unicycles is quite poor. So do you need a driver's license to go 25 miles an hour on a unicycle? Is it like a bicycle where you just wear a helmet and off you go? Like what are the requirements for that kind of transit option, right? That's something that I'm certainly not as familiar with, and I think maybe folks in the audience may be less familiar with those restrictions.
I think it definitely we have to look into the fine prints of what the legislation is in each municipality. For now, it is kind of a gray area, and that's why it's very important that we take on the educational model to allow our customers to be aware, right, that it is a gray area, and we definitely want them to take the highest precaution in using our products out in the wild, because if you see someone zooming past you on the sidewalk at 25 miles per hour, that's going to leave a very bad impression in your mind about what that person is doing and what kind of product they're using. And so right now, I think it is something that we need to have more defined guidelines for what we're able and not able to do. And maybe Rick, you can weigh in on this a little bit. I think for us, it's kind of unclear.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts? No. Okay. So scooters obviously have had a lot of changes recently. Like you don't need a helmet, or you won't as of January 1st. That's why I thought I'd just check in with you on that. But Phillip, so you said that you're moving towards electrification of your whole fleet. How far along are you in that project?
About a third of our fleet is on some kind of advanced fuel. That's mostly hybrids, because law enforcement is a big part of my fleet. We probably have about 350 or so vehicles in a law enforcement application, but I do have some cars have lights and sirens. Some law enforcement vehicles are hybrids and have lights and sirens rather. So we have about, let's see if I can do the numbers in my head, about 280 or so hybrids, about 80 electric vehicles, 50 vehicles using renewable diesel, and 12 bicycles in our fleet for employees to use. So it's about a third. We have a long way to go, and I'll put it this way. It took us 5 years or so to get from 0 to where we are now, and we know that we need to escalate that pace. We can't take another 5 years to get to 160 or so. I'm trying to get us over 100 EVs before the end of the calendar year, and then it really needs to be exponential growth from there. We can't be taking 30 years to transition our fleet over to EVs.
And Alameda is an island, correct?
The city of Alameda is.
Oh, gotcha.
But the county of Alameda is much bigger than that. It's Hayward, Oakland, Berkeley, San Leandro. It's the entire East Bay of San Francisco. Yeah.
And so when you're charging your vehicles, where's that electricity coming from? Are you just plugging into the regular old grid? Do you have other ways of generating electricity? Like where's the source of the power that's going into the vehicles? So
I'm very happy to say that about a third of our charging stations are connected to buildings that are net zero or near net zero with their on-site solar. So a good chunk of our EV fleet is running on sunshine, which is fantastic. And then for us as a commercial entity too, once you switch over to a building with solar, your rates are now much more different from PG&E, and they don't penalize you as hard for using the intense amount of energy that is needed for fleet electrification. So there's a big business case for us to be moving to more solar locations as well. But I've got EV charging in about 14 of my facilities now. Will be another couple more before the end of the year. But they're county facilities, so county lots and garages and parking lots.
Has there been a challenge in plugging into the solar side of that? Has it been easy to find the buildings that have the capability to take the chargers for the vehicles?
Yeah, we've been really fortunate. So I've done about 14 of these projects, or 14 sites, and we hadn't had to make any significant on-site electrical upgrades yet. PG&E has not had to come to us and say, all right, we're going to charge you now $2 million for a new neighborhood level substation. So we're very fortunate in that way. And our main fleet center in downtown Oakland is a 65-year-old building, and we've done 3 rounds of lighting retrofits in that building. And lighting was just so bad in the 60s in terms of energy that by doing these upgrades, we've made a significant amount of electrical capacity in that building. So I was able to install 37 charging stations by the amount of energy that was reduced through these lighting retrofits over the years. So we've been really fortunate that we have not had to do any major electrical upgrades like that so far.
So when we're looking at the challenges to adopting these vehicles on a wider level, right? Some are obviously infrastructure, some are technological, but some are also, societal or cultural. And I'm curious for you, Anthony. So you're making a single occupancy vehicle that doesn't necessarily look like the traditional family sedan that may be out there. Do you find that there's a cultural resistance to adopting vehicles that maybe look different, that feel different than what people are used to?
Again, it really depends on the area that you're actually migrating into. And we've decided to launch our vehicle here in Southern California primarily because it is much more receptive in terms of consumer understanding for the versatility, utility of the vehicle. In our case, a single passenger vehicle, we've always felt is an essential aspect of a transportation model, especially here in the U.S. And getting that put in place is important, and we want to do that as quick as we can. So early adopters like you folks here would be the greatest advantage to us. So when you think about it, 76% of our commuter traffic on a daily basis is done single passenger. And it just makes you realize that you want to have the proper tool for the job. There couldn't be something more advantageous than a single passenger vehicle. When you look at it overall in terms of usage, we're almost 90% of our usage is done single passenger. So when you go grocery shopping, you go to meet a friend, you go to do all these things, it'd be advantageous for you to have that vehicle. Even if you have another vehicle, you may have another electric vehicle in your home fleet to take the family camping. You want to take them, you have an SUV like the e-tron that Audi's coming out with. That's fine. But the idea of understanding the value of single passenger transportation is absolutely important because now we really address a lot of issues in terms of carbon emission, of course, but also the footprint in the urban environment, which we look at it more as a fingerprint from our standpoint. You can really reduce the amount of congestion in a metropolitan area with this one advantage, single passenger.
So, he's got single passenger vehicles. I mean, you have also single passenger. I mean, a single passenger, do you call them a vehicle?
Well, we struggle with calling them a vehicle versus a device because a vehicle, people always have that image in their head that it is a car, but technically it is a vehicle, right?
Yeah, and so, the difference is when you're pitching someone on a unicycle or a bicycle or a scooter, right? That's something they're familiar with, but now it's got an electric motor, right? So do you find there's any kind of challenge in educating people on the idea that these can be used as replacements for cars? Is that a concept that people struggle with when they first see them?
No. So I think as replacement for cars, no. But taking on something, let's say, as the electric unicycle, that is something that we have to fight an uphill battle on. Because when you think of a unicycle, you kind of have this preconceived notion of what it is, right? A unicycle to most people sounds hard. And when you put electric in front of that, it's like, oh, well, do I need to know how to ride a unicycle first before taking on an electric unicycle? And so the unicycle word in this instance is really just to describe the fact that it has one wheel. It's not in any way resembling a unicycle because it doesn't have a seat. It's really just a platform that you roll down the pedals for, and you keep the wheel in between your legs. And so there's no pedaling, there's really no seat attached to it. And so trying to teach people more about what this concept is has been more of a challenge. And so that's why we're trying to offer a lot of different options in our electric devices, because some people come onto our website and they feel that the electric unicycle really isn't for them. Well, in that case, we have an e-bike or an e-scooter or an electric skateboard for your liking, right? So for us, we're trying to break down the mental barrier that people have with taking on personal transportation by really creating a lifestyle around it and marketing as such, trying to teach people this is a way of life that you can get into, and even though it may take a little bit of practice and some sort of wrapping your mind around it in the short run, it can be very beneficial in the long run.
So maybe for our two representatives from municipalities here, when you guys are looking at your fleets and looking at EV vehicles, I assume you guys are looking at things that look like traditional cars, whether they're trucks or buses. They're still traditional looking vehicles that happen to not use gas. Is there any push or interest from the government side in adopting some of the vehicles that these two manufacturers produce that don't look as traditional and that serve maybe a more niche purpose?
That's a great question. So I'd go back to two stories. One is in 2004, we were mandated by the board to purchase hybrid vehicles. And when one of the departments, Public Works, has about 1,200 employees at their headquarters. And when the vehicles came in, they were supposed to be replacing vehicles in the field. Some of these were field engineers, and some of them pretty gruffly said, "I'm not driving an egg." And so they went into the motor pool. We had 54 vehicles in the motor pool. And those Priuses or Prii were hot lapped. The average vehicle traveled 11,838 miles a year. And those vehicles in their first and second years averaged 25,000 miles a year. So at the end of 2 years of service, they had 50,000 miles. What was really important was that amongst the employees, you started to see a lot of Prius and Honda Civics in the employee parking lot. And what happened was they used these like you would use a rental car. And so basically the employees thought, hey, these things are pretty easy. I can make this change. And look, my gas bill gets halved. And so there was pretty rapid adoption. And so I saw that as a huge win. Fast forward to what we're doing now with the Chevy Bolts. It's the same kind of thing where people take them and they may zip here or zip there. But then they have to get on the freeway with them, and they find, these really are automobiles. These aren't just, toys. I went to a conference about 2 months ago, and one of the significant changes I noticed was the last session, the end of the day. You see suitcases lined up along the back of the wall, and what was really different at this conference that I hadn't noticed before was there were a lot of longboards with the suitcases, something that I wasn't used to seeing. But I think that the real target market is people of your generation who will adopt these changes much more rapidly than people like myself. And I think we're going to see a lot of mobility options that I hadn't thought of. My daughter lives in Portland. She has a car, but she is able to walk to work. It's like 5 or 6 blocks. And what she's really entertaining is when the lease is up on her Fiat, is that she is going to go for a period of months and see how much she really needs a car. And if she needs a car, then she may rent one. But she is the traditional owning a vehicle is not something that she may really need to do.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we have 12 bikes in our fleet too. We have a very light duty fleet, so we don't have things like garbage trucks or things like that I oversee, but we do have some heavy duty. For the most part, we actually have a lot of cargos and things like that in our fleet, which the EV market in the U.S. has not really done a lot of work in, so we're kind of playing catch up there. But yeah, I mean, my job is to put the right vehicle in the best application for it. So for us, a lot of that means a smaller vehicle than people are necessarily used to, because it's just moving people around, and I'm not going to put a big SUV into an application like that. So I think that makes a lot of sense for us. And well, we're getting scooters too. We have departments that want scooters, but these are agencies whose headquarters are located in downtown areas, like downtown Oakland. So I mean, I think land use kind of plays a big part of this conversation here too, because transportation is very much dependent on like where you are, where you're going. If it's okay, do you mind if I pose a question to our micro-mobility folks here? I would love to hear your thoughts on this, actually. How dependent are you for your customer bases that folks are located in kind of more dense areas where it's kind of like the flip side, where you want multi-unit dwellings? Like, you would want people to be living in places where they're living within a certain amount of miles from where they're working within a certain amount of miles from where they live. So I'm kind of curious from the micromobility folks, like how's land use, like, is that the most important factor in terms of where you're looking in terms of your target audiences?
So I think that is definitely a lot of our target market is in densely populated urban areas, but we are surprised to, when we get orders in from the middle of, Midwest, I think we've gotten like orders from Milwaukee and all over. So I think for a lot of people, it's because we're trying to build a brand that's a lifestyle brand. It doesn't necessarily rest so heavily on the use of day to day, and more so on more of an aspirational lifestyle. And so for a lot of people, they buy these because it's fun and it is practical also. And so for us, yeah, that's where we're moving towards, is trying to replace 2-ton vehicles in urban areas, because as more people move into urban areas, you're going to see more cars, which means more congestion, more carbon emissions if they're not EVs. And so that's the one problem that we're trying to tackle, but it doesn't seem to be the case that our customers are only consisted of people in those areas.
Yeah, I think we're probably in the same category. The idea of educating the resourcefulness is one of the things we do of single passenger transportation, much like what you're doing. Regardless of the device, it's bringing the awareness of the fact that that is an essential aspect of getting you from one place to another, single. And when you have a vehicle that can address that, while it is simultaneously addressing things like congestion in urban environments and carbon emissions and the like, it really starts to make it quite evident that that is a resource that we should want to use. In your case, can I ask you a question? Yeah. How many vehicles would you say in Alameda's fleet could be single passenger vehicles to accommodate your needs?
Yeah, significant.
Significant.
Yeah.
So there you go. So if we were to come to you and give you those and you put those into play, everybody's going to see that and they're going to go, my goodness, that's really a cool thing to do. And all of a sudden, not only do we have the consumer base, but we have it from a municipality base and a government base. So that's our goal. That's one of the things that we really seek to do. It is extremely advantageous, especially for mobility, as you're talking about, for an individual and single passenger. And I'd love to talk to you about that, incidentally.
Sure. So we had an hour, and we're wrapping up, getting close to that. So sort of a final question, if everyone will go down and give a brief answer to this. On a normal, it's raining, it's wet in Los Angeles today, and everyone's afraid of water, so there's not many people doing this today. But on a normal day, there's many kids on bicycles, skateboards, scooters, in and around the city of Santa Monica. When you see a child on those kinds of devices, and you think to the future, what do you think the transit landscape will look like when that child gets a driver's license? We can start with you, Phillip.
Well, I hope they never get a driver's license. I don't have a car. I run a fleet of vehicles, but I hate personal vehicle ownership personally, so I don't own a car. I think it makes sense in a lot of business applications, but I would hope that they never get a driver's license. We're seeing autonomous vehicles like really come faster than I think that people are. I mean, Lyft and Uber are saying within the next 3 to 5 years they're going to have on-road vehicles that can be that are passenger ready, transporting people around. That's amazing to see. That would have tremendous implications for delivering government services, which is a fascinating thought experiment for us. I've been talking to my departments, and when I go to healthcare workers and public health workers and say, you should start thinking about how your services can be delivered mobily via autonomous vehicles, because that's a real interesting thought experiment. But sorry, back to your original question. I think AVs will be really important. Hopefully, we'll see more people living closer to the things that they're trying to do, and suburbanization and kind of sprawl will be, that trend will keep reversing. So yeah, I would love to see a day where all kids these days don't need to go get a driver's license.
I would like to see kids learn electric unicycling instead of biking, for example. Like in the future, what we see overseas in Europe and Asia specifically is a trend towards that, and I think we have the potential to reach that point as well. I'm very optimistic towards the future, and hopefully, as Phillip said, they never need to get a driver's license.
So I think there's going to be great diversity, and I agree that autonomous is going to be huge. I think personal mobility, particularly in fair climates, is going to be huge. I agree that a lot of these things are coming a lot faster, and I think the example of my daughter is probably going to be much more typical of what the future holds than what we have today.
I think in time it'll probably evolve to that where having a licensed to operate a vehicle will be something of a desire rather than a necessity. Although I still think everybody, some people, not everybody, but some people will want to drive regardless of the level of autonomous vehicle that we have. But once again, those autonomous vehicles are going to be in a variety of configuration, from a bus that can haul 20 people to a single passenger vehicle that can haul 1, and so on and so forth. The idea is starting to look at ourselves being transported from one place to another rather than the vehicle that we choose to do that with. And that's one of the consequences we have right now, because in the morning in rush hour traffic, we have 5,000 and 6,000 pound vehicles that are transporting one person to a destination. And it's consequential in a number of ways, not only from the carbon emissions, but just the footprint in the urban environment. So I think the future is very bright for us. And I think there's always going to be a desire to drive a vehicle on your own, though. And we'll have to see what comes of that.
All right, well, that takes us to our 1 o'clock time limit. Thank all of you guys for coming out, both to the Expo and to hear these fine folks talk. And thank you to the panelists for donating their time to answer some of our questions.
Thank you.
So I wanted to thank AltCar for having me to moderate this panel. It's a really interesting topic. It's a question that, from a public sector point of view, I've always asked of private sector entities and fleet managers and the OEMs and everybody involved in this space is, have we reached the tipping point yet? And what does that mean? And it may seem like a kind of impatient question. My concern has always been, at what point does public subsidy run out? And is that point at the point at which the industry has a shot at making it commercially? Or is it the point at which we continue to subsidize because of the enormous benefit that comes from this industry, from the electrification of transportation? And I've always favored the latter point of view, that public subsidy should be outcome-based, and while as long as the outcome is as positive as it is with electric vehicles across the spectrum, from fleet to passenger vehicles, then the subsidies should be continuing, especially with EVs and EV charging. And so, as we see with the state of California, luckily, we're in a very blue state that shares the same sentiment. Public subsidy is not just about getting an industry up to where it can wobble on its own 2 feet and potentially succeed or fail. It's really about continuing to get the public benefits for the residents of California. And so I'm very excited to have this panel talk about this topic, which is, are we at this point? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and read everyone's bio at once, and we're seated from your right to your left. And so wanted to introduce everybody. We'll move the order around a little bit, and then we'll have them come up and speak. The format is that everyone, or the speakers were invited to have a very short presentation, very, very short. I made that perfectly clear, and they complied. So it's really to give a little bit of background, some images, and some interesting items that might not be conveyed through their talk. And then the rest of the time we're going to spend in Q&A. First up here on the stage, and then I was really pleased to see how many fleet managers raised their hand when Phillip asked, and so we definitely want to hear from you. Please ask questions. You might even ask some questions you know the answer to, just for the rest of us dummies to figure this stuff out. So first up is going to be Kendall Reichley. He is responsible for marketing, education, and outreach for all of SCE's business and residential transportation electrification programs. And I met with a number of the team members of Kendall's earlier this week, and SCE is very engaged in transportation electrification. He includes the Charge Ready program, DC Fast Charge, Transit Bus, Home Installation Rebate, and Clean Fuel Rewards. So, as one would say, is that it? Ken's other responsibilities include marketing for net energy metering, clean energy homes, and integrated demand-side management programs. So the answer is no. There's a lot on that plate there. He began his career at SCE in 2004, and his career has spanned across the company with roles in account management, project management, and marketing. And of course, Phillip, we heard from before and got a lot of his bio, but I'll give you the official one. He's a logistics services manager for Alameda County, GSA, overseeing the fleet vehicle, parking division, commuter program, messenger service, and property and salvage team. For the past 6 years, Phillip has focused on sustainable transportation operations, growing the country's electric vehicle fleet and supporting infrastructure, and further developing the employee commuter program, which we heard about. And I did read these a little bit out of order. Clinton Bench is here from UCLA. He is the Director of Fleet and Transit, where he oversees the procurement, operation, and maintenance of 1,150 vehicles, including the Bruin Bus public transit system, where there's a very nice image on the board back there, as well as university driver safety. Clinton is also leading the transformation of the UCLA fleet toward a zero-emission future by 2025, consistent with UC carbon neutrality policy. And there are other UC fleet managers in the audience from Santa Barbara as well as Riverside. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up Kendall's presentation. At least I think I am. Let's see. There we go. Okay. All right. My clicker's right here.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here, and I'm happy to see you here. And I had never been to one of these before, so it's interesting to me to see so many people engaged in this topic, and there's a lot to talk about. So I'm the marketing guy for our transportation electrification programs. I'm trying to click this thing. Oh, I guess I'm going to go this way. And so we started, maybe 3 years ago with the Charge Ready program that I'll be talking about, which was fully subscribed in a short period of time, and it was really gratifying. And all of this relates to our bigger overarching kind of problem that we're solving, which is we're living in a state that's a beautiful state. It's one of the most desirable states to live in ever. And unfortunately, we have pretty unhealthful air quality. So I'm a hiker. I go hiking in the local mountains, and I get up to the top. I have a great time. I'm energizing. And when I get up to the top of the mountain, I look down across the Southland, and sometimes it's kind of hard to see the ground. And so we have a problem to solve. And California has a goal to address that, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below our 1990 levels by 2030. And that's an aggressive goal. And then we have a goal to reduce our greenhouse gases to 80% below our 1990 levels by 2050. So to get there, it's going to take some work. We're all going to have to work together. And we, in 2017, released our Clean Energy and Electrification Pathway White Paper that talks about things that we're going to do, and I'll be kind of diving into that, to address that. So we all know this. We're all like-minded individuals. We all understand that most of the greenhouse gases are coming from transportation and the electric sector, followed closely by commercial, industrial, and residential. And in order for us to come up with a good plan for all of this to integrate, we have to have an integrated plan so that these sectors are working together. And our Clean Energy Pathway White Paper addresses that. So we said we're going to do 3 things. Number 1, decarbonize the grid, get to 85% decarbonized grid. Number 2, electrify buildings. Simply put, replacing about a third of the space heating and water heating with electric space heating and water heating. And the third thing, transportation electrification, that I'll be talking about today, and that's what I've been spending quite a bit of time working on lately. So we think that we need to get 24% of our cars and trucks to be zero emission by 2030. And 15% of our medium-duty vehicles, same thing, zero emission by 2030. And 6% of our heavy-duty vehicles. So to get there it's kind of a heavy lift. The vehicles are available, right? So commercially available electric vehicles, no problem. And especially for light and medium duty. And then we're going to have some heavy-duty, long-range vehicles that are going to come online in 2019 and 2020. So we think the vehicles are going to be available. The thing that we're talking about is charging. It's like, where do I charge these vehicles? The most common thing to do is to charge at home and in your business, and we're going to be talking about that. So we set up some programs to address this. I'm just going to run through them real quick. 6 programs. On the light-duty side, you may all be familiar with the Charge Ready program that provides a panel, meter, and service, and a stub-out to support electric vehicle charging stations. We do the construction project, and we pay a rebate to offset some or all the cost of the charging station. At home, we have the Charge Ready Home Installation Rebate Project, where we just pay a rebate to offset the electrician's cost to install the charging stations. And then for multi-unit dwellers, we have the DC fast charging pilot, where we're putting in clusters of DC fast charging stations in 5 different locations in disadvantaged communities, so that multi-unit dwelling residents, can find a place to charge their vehicle, and it will make them a little more likely to think about an electric vehicle when they go to buy a vehicle. And then over on the heavy-duty side, we recently launched our Port of Long Beach project, where we've taken rubber tire gantry cranes that move these giant containers, and they have been burning fossil fuels, and now they're running on electricity. Same thing with yard haulers and tractors that are pulling containers around in the Port of Long Beach on electricity. We recently launched our transit bus program for municipally owned transit bus agencies that operate lines within disadvantaged communities to provide, same thing, make-readies for electric vehicle charging stations to power electric buses. And then we were recently approved for our medium-duty, heavy-duty program that we're developing right now. We're calling it Charge Ready Transport, that provides for buses, medium, heavy-duty vehicles, and even off-road vehicles. So that in the end, picture this, imagine a world where the energy that powers our lives and propels us forward is provided by Earth's clean resources. Thanks for your time.
All right, good morning. I guess it's still morning. Again, I'm Clinton Bench from UCLA, and thanks to the city of Santa Monica and for hosting again this, I guess it's the 13th year for AltCar Expo. I've only been here about 4 years, but have been to each of these events and always find the educational sessions very helpful. So glad you're all here to participate as well, and glad to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at UCLA, as well as the UC system as a whole. So look up at the slide there on the screen, it's sort of showing the concept of a triple bottom line for sustainability. Many people on campus at UCLA think when we're talking about sustainability, we're only talking about the environmental footprint, but we're really talking about environmental, social, and financial sustainability. And it's critical for all of us to keep this in mind as automotive fleet sustainability professionals. It's not so much that it's a recipe for failure if we don't, but it definitely creates unnecessary risk if we're not thinking of all three of these different perspectives. So from my perspective, we're talking about our vehicles on campus. And if you look at economic sustainability, it means reducing the average vehicle age and minimizing the life cycle costs of our vehicles through more strategic maintenance planning. On the environmental front, of course, it's increasing the proportion of battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles, reducing GHG emissions. And interestingly enough, UCLA really is a medium-sized city, 85,000 people on campus on any given day. And so we also have our own sort of social sustainability issues. Some of our academic and administrative departments aren't as fortunate as others to have a good revenue source or corporate partnerships, and so are not quite as able to participate in this clean vehicle revolution. And deal with the higher upfront capital costs of those vehicles. But there's no question that the reducing carbon emissions is really the fundamental driver of our stewardship on the sustainability front and fleet. We're working with the other 10 UC campus fleet services units to reach what UC President Janet Napolitano has said, that we need to reach carbon neutrality by 2025. It's called our Carbon Neutrality Initiative for the UC system. And not all of the campuses have necessarily been as bold as the LA campus, but for over 2 years now, we've required that any vehicle purchase where that vehicle and that classification is available in battery electric or plug-in hybrid, that's what you have to purchase, regardless of whether or not there's an increment of capital cost. And that's been 2 or 3 years now that we've had that policy. And so at this point for us, I mean, when you look at that policy and the very little resistance that we've gotten to it, it really does feel like we've passed that proverbial turning point in terms of acceptance of the technology. And in many cases also on the financial side. And you can see here that as all good fleet managers try and do, I'm not sure if I'm a good fleet manager, but I do my best, but we try and limit the variability of types of vehicles that our customers purchase. And so we've actually been able to create a preferred vehicle menu for our internal customers at UCLA that's by and large battery electric and plug-in hybrid. Excited too, I don't even think it's on here yet, the new Bolt cargo vehicle that's coming available. So we're starting to be able to get into some of that cargo capacity as well. And you can see here too, just a slide that's sort of showing where we're at now. The unleaded and flex fuel vehicles currently making up about 63% of our vehicle fleet. But by 2025, we expect that to be down around 15%. So we're excited about moving in that direction. And I also want to just note what that means in terms of carbon reduction as well. It's our expectation that we'll be able to reduce by approximately 30% by 2025. And the interesting thing is there are a couple of classifications that really do cause us a lot of challenge. In particular, our vans. We have a very large van pool fleet. So on one hand, it's doing a great job in terms of reducing single occupant vehicle trips to campus. But the availability of vans and battery electric or plug-in hybrid, not as easy to come by right now, although we're hoping to see some interesting new models come on the market soon. Interested to see what Change comes up with. And to some extent, the Chrysler Pacifica can be used for van pool applications as well. So we have a good, healthy rivalry with all of our other UC campuses. Again, I was saying that not every campus is doing as much as we are, but I want to give props to places like UC Irvine, UC San Diego. I mean, San Diego's penetration of battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles is similar to ours. And at UC Irvine, they're sort of leaving us in the dust a bit when it comes to transit vehicles with their 100% electric bus fleet for their Anteater Express shuttles. Pretty exciting. Same sort of buses that we have up there on the screen. We've also got a great internal grant. So thinking more broadly, you see internal grant from the Office of the President for $50,000 for consulting support from Carbon Blue. And I think everybody's familiar with them. Happy to tell you more about them afterwards. But some of the work that they're doing for the system as a whole, projecting the expected quantity of fuel used and the number of miles traveled by each vehicle, helping us sort of figure out exactly when certain types of clean fuel vehicles are going to come on the market so that we can develop a 7-year capital plan for the entire UC system. And we've got 1,000 vehicles, but when you go to the entire UC system, we're talking about 5,000 vehicles. So we're pretty excited about this effort because when you talk about 5,000 vehicles for a public university system, my sense is that there's nobody else in the United States. I certainly haven't heard of any other public university systems yet who are making an effort like this to be bold and reach carbon neutrality by 2025. So I know I'm bumping up against my time for my remarks, so I'll try and wrap it up quickly. But one more item I'd like to just share as food for thought relates to kind of the social dimension, again, of the sustainability triple bottom line. And that's kind of the fundamental skepticism we face by a lot of our peers who may not be automotive experts, even in this progressive-minded university system, about the fundamental practicality of reaching carbon neutrality. It's easy to shoot daggers at it when you talk about, sort of that increment in cost for purchasing battery electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. And it's not to say, and also just the concept of carbon neutrality, if you think about it literally, you say, okay, well, we're never going to reach carbon neutrality by 2025. We're not going to get rid of all internal combustion engine vehicles. Why are we even thinking about this pie in the sky stuff? And so it's not to say that we should retreat from the term carbon neutrality necessarily, but I think we have a duty to really help explain what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get rid of all ICE vehicles, but it means that we'll take responsibility for the carbon that we do still generate from those vehicles, and we'll be accountable to it through offset fees, changes to the use patterns, changes to the way we do maintenance to our vehicles, and also commit to faster replacement of dirty vehicles with clean vehicles at the true end of their useful life and not just when we find that we can't buy parts anymore for them. So I'll stop there and looking forward to our panel discussion. Thanks.
See, I think if I, yep, no, hit this. There we go, okay. So thinking about whether this is a tipping point for electric vehicles, I think it's a really, really exciting time because it does feel like we're there. So speaking for public agencies, a lot of folks that I work with in the Bay Area, we're beyond pilot projects. We've been piloting these EVs in our fleet for years, but we're not at wide-scale deployment yet. Like, we're not there. It feels like we're right on the edge of getting there. So, I want to think about what are some of the things that would help us move there. Because, speaking for my fleet, it took us a few years to get to where we're at with electric vehicles, and we can't keep on the same pace. We don't have enough time. We got to keep accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles if we're going to meet our goals. We can't keep at the pace that we're getting at. So for this talk today, I kind of thought about, as a fleet manager, what are some of the 3 things that would be very helpful to get us beyond just having a few to getting really wide-scale deployment of electric vehicles. And so I came up with 3. And so the first one I hinted at before is we need better data. For gas vehicles, there's a lot of really good systems in place. I can pull up a report, again, very easily and show exactly how much I spent on fuel in the last year or whatever. The gas, the price of gas changes. We have planned very well. We know how to accommodate for these changes very well. We know how to, we can integrate with them. We know how to do that. But when it comes to electrics, it's really, really challenging. So I've got stations that, again, have 14 different facilities for me as a county agency, and 13 of them are on PG&E. One of them is on Alameda Municipal Power, so a whole other separate things. I've got time of use rates, which means that my energy changes throughout the day. Gas if it's $2.99 at 10 a.m., it's normally going to be that same price at 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., but that's not the case for electricity. So how do we accurately account for that across multiple different rate tariffs, different utilities, in my case, because I've got multiple utilities to deal with? It's a real challenge. And so it's a fundamental problem that if someone were to ask me, how much did you spend on electricity in your electric vehicle fleet last year? I've got to run some serious spreadsheets to figure that answer out. And that's not really scalable. So that's one of those things where I think it would be a huge, huge help for us. The hardware, exists. There's things that can really help us. So I put a screenshot here of some of the GPS that we're using in our electric vehicles. That gives us fantastic data for our EVs. I pulled up one of our Focus EVs. There's a picture of it over there. When is it charging? We're doing pretty good at moving these off peak, and then we're staggering them throughout the middle of the night, so certain chargers come on at certain times, so we avoid costly spikes. And so we get a lot of great data there. So there's the fundamentals are there to say, okay, great. When this car started charging at my fleet facility, there's a price. And then when it drove to a different building at a different rate tariff, that price just changed. And then it just changed because it moved from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So those are the things that we really need to be able to more sophisticated, more accurately manage large scales of electric vehicles. So that's one. Two, more charging options. So we have level 1, level 2, and level 3 EV charging at at our facilities. It all depends on what your vehicles are doing and what's their duty cycle, how are they being used. A lot of my vehicles come back and they're not used again for another 12 hours. So great, we're going to plug that into a level 1, let it charge for a long time, or we're going to put it into a level 2, but a station that's been programmed to wait until 3 in the morning to start charging, because we know it's not going to be used for another 12 hours. Fantastic. And so you can see one of the pictures over here is one of our energy reduced stations. We also have cold stations that wait. And then again, just a messy level 2 that's got level 1s hanging on the side there. And then level 3 charging as a fleet is very helpful too, because I need to turn vehicles around fast in a lot of instances, a lot of different applications. I need a car back on the road as soon as possible. And so level 3 charging is very helpful. And so we have a 50 kilowatt charger. ChargePoint announced up to 400 kilowatts of charging. So they're really getting into very, very high speed charging. And there's a number of OEMs that are doing that as well. And I know it's a little taboo because we haven't a lot of success in this area, but something like battery swapping, if that were to make a resurgence again and focus on the B2B market, the business market, so the consumer market, me as a fleet, that becomes really interesting. Because if I can make EV charging, so like battery swapping in this case, if I can make that as easy and as quick as refueling a car at a gas station, now we're talking law enforcement potentially, which represents millions of on-road vehicles across the United States. So if a car can pull in and then recharge quickly, that's great. Because I have a lot of vehicles, and again, fleet managers across this country have a lot of vehicles in lots of different applications, and some of them cannot have any planned downtime. Like it's used constantly. It's a 24-hour in-use vehicle. And to say, well, now this vehicle is going to be off-road, and charging, even if it's just an hour a day, unacceptable. And so that's something that we really need to get into. So I'm excited to see where the OEM market is going on charging, more high power, and I don't know, maybe other stuff. We'll see what comes down the road. But that would be very helpful for us. Okay, the last thing, and I know this is another good one because I have a utility on my panel with me today. Demand charge reform. We need it bad. So quick show of hands, is everybody kind of familiar with what a demand charge is? Or let me ask, who is not familiar with what a demand charge is? Okay, all right, that's good, okay. So real quick, a demand charge, I'll put it in sort of like a fleet metaphor. So when a vehicle pulls up at one of my gas stations and they put in 20 gallons of fuel, we track the cost of that, we bill back the department. That's like your energy, your electrical usage fees. So you pay for the energy that you use. The equivalent for a demand charge would be when that car pulls up, when that station turns on, they just pay $50 just to turn the station on. For us, that could be $2,000 if it's a really bad charge in the middle of the day in peak rates. So that's significant. We're talking thousands of dollars a year in fees before we even start paying for the actual, electrons to go into the car. So that's a really big deal. There's a lot of things that help with that. We can change rates by doing on-site solar, fantastic, but there's other buildings we can't do that. And so I put a messy, I don't know if I can I? Yeah, so I don't know if you can see this over here on the top right.
This is energy costs at my main fleet center, which has 37 charging stations. And you'll see in the summer, that blue is demand charges. It's over half our bill in the summertime. So it's really significant. And we have 80, and I'm trying to get to hundreds in the next couple years. So that's a problem that we have to solve, is how do we tackle demand charges where we're responsible users of the electrical grid. We don't blow anything up here by moving to all electric, but we're fuel switching from gas to energy. And how can we do that in a way that encourages us to be smart users of energy, certainly, and we've been doing that, but also ways that don't penalize us from moving off of gas to electricity as fast as we can, because we need to go at an accelerated rate. So this is a real big problem that needs to get looked at. And so you'll see the bottom chart there too is that's our charger use profile throughout the day at our main fleet facility. Those big spikes. That's what gets expensive. And so it's a lot of chargers turning on at once at certain hours, and then they come back from the field and they turn on. So that's a real big help for us. That will be a big impact as we move on. Yeah, that's it. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. These are some really good thoughts for our panel today. So I'm going to start out with a couple of questions. The first I wanted to direct to Kendall. So, in your presentation, you talked about the 6 programs, transportation electrification, and getting the word out there. I wanted to start with a hard question, then they'll get easier. But I noticed something about Charge Ready 1, and I do understand that when you talked to Edison, it really was a pilot. It was testing the water, and you guys really tried to make that clear, but not everybody quite understood that. It was very criticized in being like too restrictive, that the size was too much and everything, and then it was oversubscribed. So what do you think that tells you about the market for that particular product?
Good question, and yes, when we launched the program, we did get some comments from some of the potential applicants that the minimum requirement of 10 EV charging stations on the property or 5 in disadvantaged communities was something that they couldn't support. And there were things written into the program that talked about size of the parking lot, number of parking spaces that you had to qualify for the charging stations. And yet, as you mentioned, it was fully subscribed rather quickly. What that tells me is that there was some pent-up demand. Certainly, there were some hand raisers who were ready to get EV charging stations on their properties. And, I like to say that there was some low-hanging fruit that came in right away. And to address that, and so we learned some lessons as we launched the pilot. It was a pilot. And since then, we've submitted an application for the full program, which provides for fewer than 10 charging stations per site if it's approved by the commission. And we think that that's going to make it a lot easier to hit our goal of 48,000 charging stations installed through the full program if we can, if it's approved and we get permission to install fewer charging stations on each site. I think it's going to really open it up. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And then just quickly following up, you mentioned Charge Ready Transport, which is focused on heavy duty and bus transport. I believe there's some aspects of that which deal with demand charges. But from your perspective, what was the difference, or what's been the difference, reaching out to the passenger vehicle world versus reaching out to the medium and heavy duty world when it comes from the utilities perspective?
So thank you, good question. When we reached out to the passenger vehicle world, we were talking to workplaces, destination centers, fleet operators, and multi-unit dwellings. And we found that there were some who were, almost just really eager to enroll in the program, and to put it for the light-duty vehicles, that made good sense. Now we're in the process of developing our Charge Ready Transport program, which is a medium and heavy duty. And there, we've actually engaged with some of the agencies that are interested in this. We've conducted some forums to really ask them, what's important to you? So if we reach out to you, what's the best way to engage you in this conversation? What are your goals right now? What are you working on? So that, I think that we can collaborate together and my job is to to journey map it and figure out where they are now, what they're thinking about, and a lot of you fleet managers, like what's on your plate, and then figuring out a way to fit this into the journey map to the end where we can engage with you and hopefully get you to say yes to the program. But it's going to be a different experience, and that's what makes my job really interesting.
So, Clinton, I liked what you closed with, the idea of getting to a place where you're really looking at the true life cycle of vehicles rather than when they're limping on their last legs and you can't get parts for them anymore. I think some of the fleet managers are related to that. What do you think of in terms of the time frame for turning over existing vehicles when you consider about the fact that a lot of fleet vehicles are really built to last? And so for the UC system as a whole, how what does your kind of vision and horizon for an all-electric fleet look like?
Yeah, I think. Hello? There we go. You're right. It's a challenge, and I'll just start by kind of affirming your assumptions there. If you look at the UCLA campus in particular, we're a very densely developed campus on a postage stamp, perhaps, if you compare it to, say, UC Santa Cruz or even Berkeley. And so we're utilizing our vehicles heavily, but they're not traveling very many miles, right? So the question also comes up, are we talking about replacing the vehicle after a certain number of years? Are we talking about replacing the vehicle after a certain number of engine hours? Are we talking about miles? If you look at miles, I mean, we have some, 1998, Dodge Ram pickup trucks that haven't gone more than, 58,000 miles, but they're absolutely, it's absolutely absurd for us to keep them on the property, and we've done a pretty good job of getting rid of them. So it's multidimensional, and I don't think that, part of the problem we have in the UC system, and we're lucky at UCLA to have a good analytical group, but some of the campuses are just not big enough to have more than one analyst, if any analysts at all. So asking them to try and figure out, some way of determining the optimal time for replacement of vehicles, aside from just saying, let's try and make sure we don't keep anything more than 10 years. I mean, you just can't necessarily ask them to do that. And that's part of why we're excited to be engaging Carbon Blue system-wide, so that they can help make some determinations about how to prioritize, looking at the specific duty cycles of different types of vehicles and understanding which are the ones that are actually having the biggest impact on carbon emissions. And then understanding, through other means, looking at our value judgments at each campus, how much are we valuing the reduction of carbon emissions versus how much are we valuing a reduced impact on capital budgets. So I guess just to answer the question then, what are we doing at UCLA? We're shooting for 8 or 9 years as an average number of years life cycle for vehicles. But we're spending a lot more time now understanding what is the duty cycle of that vehicle. How much of its days are spent actually sitting idling, which can be just as damaging to the vehicle engine as driving it in many cases, and certainly just as damaging to the environment. If you look at police applications, for example, more than 50% of their time is spent idling. That may be necessary to be able to run their computer systems, but just another good reason why even traditional hybrids are important to try and get into the police fleets. On the facility side, a lot of times it's just running the engine because it feels convenient to the user, and that's an educational issue, which then, makes me very happy to see what you're talking about in terms of telematics and being able to see when that's happening so that you can do better education of the users.
Philip, I really appreciated your presentation, and as you mentioned that you were saving some tidbits for our talk. I was very interested in what you were talking about at the end of during your presentation, and also at the end of your conversation with Terry, about the types of tools that you have at your disposal for fleet management. And I'm wondering, do you foresee any entities, or do you see out there any entities that are working on this? When you think of like national labs, NRail I know is good with developing new tools, or Argonne National Lab. Have you heard anything about kind of the beginnings of these sorts of things that you're looking for?
Yeah, so we worked with Berkeley Labs on 2 projects. One was that level of kind of developing what we called our cold stations to basically override the station's desire to want to turn on right away when you plug it in. It waits until it's allowed to start charging at staggered times throughout the night. That was a project with Berkeley Labs, and they were about to do another one, which is to develop more of a sort of fleet management assessment tool using GPS data to show, kind of like what you were talking about, where are the priorities versus miles traveled and which vehicles could really fit those types of applications. Those have been really great. I would love to see more coming down the line. I mean, I think what we did with that Berkeley Labs project to do, to basically reprogram our stations to start waiting till off-peak hours, that could be a lot smarter. I mean, these stations are real smart, and that's like a mediocrely dumb project, I would say. Like, these stations could get better. They could say, you know, we're all going to turn on at off-peak rates and ping the cars and say, all right, who needs charging, you know? And the cars, well, this is sort of anthropomorphizing cars and stations, but like, I mean, this is what we need. And the car's like, you know what? I need 6 kilowatt hours. I need 4 kilowatt hours.
Does the car raise its windshield?
Yeah, right.
The windshield wiper.
And then the stations make a determination. Okay, you're going to start charging now, or these 14 vehicles are going to start charging now. We'll start staggering through the middle of the night because we want to avoid maybe a ceiling that doesn't exceed 100 kilowatts, let's just say, because that's determined by our utility. They say, hey, don't cross this ceiling, and once you do, we're going to slap a pretty significant fee on you. So there's a lot more sophistication that could be. I mean, these cars are way smarter than gas cars. They're way smarter. So we can really use that if those tools get developed.
There's an entity out of UCLA called SMRC, and they've presented here at AltCar in the past, and they're doing that kind of integrated charging grid and solar energy management. But do you think that those kind of applications that you're talking about, is that things that you've seen that are available now, or are they still sort of 4 or 5 years?
I wouldn't say 4 or 5 years. There's a lot of people working on them, and I know there's a lot of OEM compatibility issues that they may be able to work with certain stations and not others, and that becomes a bit of an issue as a fleet manager too, because if we're talking about trying systems that don't connect, they can't talk to each other, that makes it challenging. I wouldn't say 4 or 5. I've had a lot of meetings with some people that are doing some really great stuff now in terms of trying to get that level of energy management to happen at the charging station level.
Yeah, if I can just jump in too. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but my gut is telling me probably 2 to 3 years, because it's very interesting going to the NAFA Institute and Expo this year in Anaheim versus previous ones. This is the first one where you're actually seeing commercialized smart charging applications like this that are able to do vehicle to grid and, you know, sort of, you know, what vehicle needs what kind of determinations. If you look a little bit closer, those commercialized applications haven't really actually been tried yet, but they are buying booths. So, you know, usually that means probably we're about 3 years. So I'm excited, and SMRC, I'm glad you brought them up. They actually are going to be testing very soon with a local transit operator. We're trying to get them to test with us as well. I think they're going to be testing down in Torrance, I think, maybe, or anyway, but they'll hopefully with us as well.
I know that Edison is interested in kind of being a smart utility, and both upwardly to the grid, you know, grid management, and has participated in efforts that kind of looking at the smart grid and how it applies to different applications. Do you see those kind of cutting edge stuff from? We were talking earlier about how you try and keep apprised of all the different areas of Edison and all the kind of cool things that are going on. Are there things in the research realm that you think are coming down the pipe that'll be integrated into some of the consumer programs that you work on?
Interesting question. I am not aware of that kind of activity happening at Edison, but it's a big company. So I would say certainly on the transmission and distribution side, we have an entire organization focusing on the smart grid. Grid mod and grid modernization, and I would say that they are most likely thinking about that sort of thing. It's interesting that, so, I don't know, 16 years ago when I started working for Edison as an account executive, I would talk to customers about energy efficiency because of the demand on the grid and the need to reduce the demand on the grid. Then we came along with lots of photovoltaics, and I know there are people here in the PV world, and suddenly we came up with the duck curve where we have excess generation, and then we talked about, well, we need a grid that can kind of handle this varying demand and the varying inputs on the grid, so we have a whole organization that's working on that, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if we were thinking about that.
Clem, getting into one of the points that you were making, this came up on our planning phone call, was you talk about vendors sort of showing things they're not quite ready for, and then looking at, because you're a transit operator, we spent some time talking about transit buses, and that it's very exciting. It's that it's very exciting to be part of this. It's just that it would be really nice if the vendors could get out of kind of startup mode and start sharing realistic data. Not to be picked at, but to kind of be better partners.
Yeah, and this is, it's chicken or egg. We're to the point now with multiple transit bus OEMs that they're putting out reliable products, right? I mean the vehicles, when they're delivered, they've got their growing pains, but the picture behind me are BYD buses. Those were the first off the line of that particular model of a 35-foot bus. Yeah, we had our growing pains, but were they any worse than the ones that we had with our last CNG order? Not necessarily. So I think we're to a turning point with those manufacturers in terms of the reliability of their products. So we're looking at BYD, New Flyer, Proterra, Gillig now with an option. There are others that do remanufactured. But yeah, how do you know if their promises of a 10 or 12-year battery life is something that you can believe? It just hasn't been proven yet. It hasn't been proven necessarily anywhere in the world. We can't even necessarily go to Europe or China with that exact kind of application and say, how long have they lasted? So it is a challenge. I think that we have to be a little bit cautious in terms of expecting that the first products off the line are necessarily going to last as long as what the Federal Transit Administration requires in terms of heavy-duty buses. And I would say, too, that there are challenges as well, especially with new entrants into the market, to make sure that the body and the vehicle that's being built around these electric motors is also going to last. So I mean, that's just something we have to be cautious about. Obviously, we're confident enough in BYD to, buy their products, but the reality is, too, they're a new player in the market. So it's just another level of, another dimension of where we need to be watching out, making sure that we're helping them make sure that they're building the best product that we can. I know that as we're ready for our next order of 4 vehicles that are being built up in Lancaster, we're there every 2 weeks, making sure that we're providing our own expert advice, from vehicle engineering standpoint to make sure that we're getting the best possible product.
Well, I was talking with a colleague here, and they mentioned that they had heard from someone at the state purchasing office that the state might actually be moving towards removing internal combustion engines from their purchase list for state departments. I was going to ask you guys, but it sounds like this may be a redundant question, but are you guys ready to get there? I think you already showed your purchase that's already there. Do you feel like the sedan area of fleet management is already well enough served that there's really no need to buy a ICE vehicle?
Yeah, we don't buy gas sedans anymore for our fleet. Everything is at minimum a hybrid or electric for normal sedans. That's easy. Get us to cargos, those little bit like those sort of transit 150 size cargos or kind of around that area. That's where we would love to see more OEMs get in the market. But sedans are easy. Yeah, we don't buy gas sedans anymore unless it's for a specific like police. Package.
There's some interesting companies operating the kind of medium duty market. So would you say almost that the medium duty market might be farther ahead than the van pickup truck market?
I would say the two ends of the spectrum, I think, are the farthest ahead. Yeah. I think buses at this point, I mean, as long as you have the capacity to invest the capital resources, there's no reason to be buying, internal combustion engine buses. There's no reason to be buying them in the sedan area either. But it's the middle part, right? I mean, it's the medium duty pickup truck is definitely a headache for us, and something that you don't necessarily see available anywhere in the world. But I would just point out that I love the idea of a state purchasing authority saying we are not buying internal combustion engines anymore, proving that they're willing to do that, because there are van applications, for example. Nissan has an electric cargo van that if you go to Europe, that you see them everywhere. You know, if you go to Japan, you see them everywhere. They're just not willing to bring it to the United States yet because they do not feel confident that they're going to be able to sell the minimum number of units. So whatever we can do to prove to manufacturers like Nissan, bring your NV200 over here. You've got 5,000 units that are, that'll be purchased within the first year. If we can say that to them somehow, I think it'll be a great step.
I enjoyed speaking with you earlier last week and this week, and thank you for AltCar for having us.